Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Okay. ACX Masters Day 2. Are we up and ready for this? Are we good? Are we great? Good. Hi, Eldon. You Gesh? How you doing? Good, good. So I had some queries from some of the guys who were down under overnight. And so I've been answering those. So sorry if I was a minute or two late in getting on the call. Just sort of dealing with any issues to do with directories and Dropbox and that usual sort of thing. So in summary, what we're going to do today is introduce this idea. I mentioned yesterday the causes of work. So we're going to explore that territory. And when you've explored that territory, maybe something you already know and sense, but I'm going to make that very real, bring it bang up to date in terms of what the latest research and the latest understanding is around that stuff. We'll also have a look towards the end of today's session at the Experience Manager, the software I was banging on about yesterday, just to show you how to get access to that if you haven't already sort of signed in. When you have sort of signed into that system, I can invite you into my workspace, which is what I'm going to show you today, show you how I use the tool and how useful it can be just as a repository for nothing else, a way of saving all the work that you're doing. And we're also going to get into some of the work which was a build on yesterday. That makes sense. So we've got a great time ahead of us, usual sort of thing. We'll do a couple of hours, then we'll take a 60-minute break, and then we'll come back on and for the second set of sessions is usually I usually get finished in advance, so give you at least 30 minutes to have a look at today's exercises. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do, let me switch over to the deck and share my screen, and then we can get the show on the road. Good. Let's pause that, which is a nice screen. So by the way, I've included that on the PowerPoint deck. When James produced the customer experience quote book, of course, it's quotes from the sort of luminaries in the CX space. So there's 365 of those, so one for every day of the week. But what we did was turn that into a sort of a screen show as well. So if you're putting PowerPoints on and stuff, you know, you have like that 5 minutes before you start and everything, you're checking everything's working. It's great just to switch that on. That's in the PowerPoint deck, of course, and the PDF deck. You won't be able to see that because it's an MP4 file that's embedded in the PowerPoint. But just in case you were wondering what that was all about. So let's have a look. Day 2. Let's start off with our usual questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers for you. And if I don't, I'll go and find out somebody who actually does. So over to you guys. Questions. Sound of silence.
Good morning, Steve. No questions, but thanks for yesterday. My goodness, I tried to download from Dropbox yesterday. Yeah, it
Big
failed
files.
overnight. So that's the only thing. But yesterday was quite an insightful day, and I'm looking forward to day 2.
Good, good. And as I said yesterday, it was really sort of baby steps to a certain extent. Though we introduced those first templates, it was also getting people up to speed with what is this outside-in thing and why is it different. So hopefully you've got some ammunition there now to actually be able to draw a difference between some of the old classic business type approaches, which worked for the best part of time, but now no longer seem fit for purpose in terms of what we're trying to do, third decade of the 21st century. So thanks for the observation. Yugesh, any questions?
Nothing from my side, Steve. I think just for me, looking forward to the rest of today. And yeah, just love the detail of the case studies that you share. So it's insightful for us to, identify customers that we're currently experiencing the same things with. So yeah, appreciate it.
Good. And years ago we would have used sort of classically, we would have set a case study up based on real life, but nevertheless it was fairly generic. And what we encourage all our coaches to do is once you're familiar with the material, once you're running the material, is to include your own work, because that's where the stories come from, because people will ask you a question and it reminds you of an instance on that journey at that particular time. So, it's like you're sharing your scars with everybody, but at the same time, it makes it more real and less theoretical. Sort of this idea of, let's have the customer experience of making a cup of coffee, well, how useful is that? Yeah, we all do it, but does it demonstrate the principles? So yeah, so we're going to get more of that, obviously. And as I said, those usual suspects that I showed you in terms of the people who retain my services and the services of my immediate team, plus some of the stories from our partners, like our Swedish partners out there, what they were doing, and some of the discoveries that you make on the way. It's so exciting to be involved in this space. Good. Kabani, any questions?
No questions from me, but thank you for yesterday. It really was insightful, and it also brings back and firms what you're actually doing in the real world as well. So thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to today. I've just gone onto the Dropbox. I managed to get easy access there, so I'm just going to be downloading now.
Yeah, the files are large, and as I was saying to one of our comrades in arms who's down under, who's watching this later on, probably today, is the files are very big, and sometimes they do take a while to download. And I put the PDF versions of the files yesterday were from the previous session, but they're exactly the same as the session we ran yesterday. But I also put the PowerPoint deck in. The point of that is that you want to use this material and make it your own. If you're going to use it in the work that you're going to be doing, it's great to get the PDF, but you want the raw files. The only challenge with the PowerPoint file, of course, is if you haven't got the same fonts on your system, it's going to, screw with the deck. But that's just a case of changing them to the fonts you do have on your system, and then you've got the slide builds and all those other things that go with it. Today's deck will look slightly different because, of course, I've customized it for you guys. So when you have a look at the PDF versions of today's deck, it will be today's deck, not a previous sort of session as well. I'm also keen that, as I said, that the directories are going to be up there, and they are humongously big. So if you've got narrow bandwidth, it's much better to download them rather than view them online. The other side of that is including some of the previous videos. So if something's not clear on the session we've just run, and you didn't get a chance to ask the question, you can always dive into the same session from, earlier on this year, for instance, and there'll be 2 or 3 of those videos from similar sessions that we've done. And we did one session a few weeks ago, and we had like 40 odd people dialing into the call. So it was very sort of stateside centric. So it was the timing wasn't very good for other people, but nevertheless, of the 40 odd people, 30 odd were actually dialing in from the States. So that got to be quite an exciting session, because everybody was asking questions and stuff, and I really had to constrain the time in terms of questions and ask for them to provide it in the text. So I've also shared yesterday's chat room discussion as well. Of course, as you know, in the chat room, you can chat to me privately or chat to somebody else privately if you don't want to share the question or an observation that you're making. That's perfectly valid. Obviously, I don't share those private chats. You might ask me, a personal question. Okay, good. Well, if there's no Q questions at the moment, what we'll do is we'll get into the material, because today's a sort of a fairly meaty day. The first thing we want to do is revisit this cinema question, this movie theatre question. Is we started off with looking at it yesterday from saying we want to report on our business performance. So what metrics will we actually put into that report? And the usual suspects arose in terms of capacity management, utilization, footfall, sales from concessions and things like that. Then we juxtapose that with this shift to thinking of it from the customer's perspective. So what I want you to do now, guys, is share why you go to your particular movie theatre / cinema, depending on where we are in the world. What entices you there? What value is created for you when you go and visit? So, Eldon, do you want to kick off on that one?
Excuse me, the problem, speaking while you're in mute. Okay, so I live pretty much out in the bush, and so the closest movie cinema to where we are also happens to be one where I have I wouldn't call it a loyalty card, but as part of my healthcare plan, they've got a loyalty program,
Right.
And as part of that, we get a discount on the movie tickets. So in South Africa, there are 2 main movie theater companies. And so I go to the one because of the loyalty card or the discount that I get. And it also just happens to be closest. So it's got to be I guess, something that I really want to see. So firstly, what's on show. Alternatively, I'll get dragged along by family or friends to watch something that I don't want to, but because it's an event that's been planned, we're going to have fun together. We're going to catch a flick and then have dinner or something. So it's about social. And then I tend to always try and go to the brand where I get my discount. So I think those are mainly the drivers. It's the attraction itself. It's the fact that it's close. It's the fact that it's a discount, or it's the fact that I'm going to be hanging out with friends or family.
What about the actual experience in the cinema? What's that for you?
I didn't really give that much thought. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's you go there and we pay very little for our tickets. We're 3 in our family, so we pay very little for our tickets, but we pay about 10 times that amount for the refreshments, for the popcorn and Coke and bar of chocolate. That's always a shock. That's always disappointing.
That is true. That is
Yeah,
true.
and I wish there was someone in the world who could explain that to me.
Yeah.
Then, when you walk in, it's like sort of, 15 minutes, half an hour's worth of forthcoming attractions and cell phone network adverts, which isn't cool. I really don't like that. I think we should, start the movie and get on with the movie. That's what I'm there for. But I find that the movie business, besides COVID, I think it's more and more competing with online streaming services. And yeah, I mean, I'll just, rather than drive 45 minutes out there to watch the latest Superman, I'll just catch it on demand when I want.
Yeah.
So I don't attribute a lot of value to the in-movie experience itself. It's more about, I suppose, just hanging out with the friends and family and putting the feet up and having a bit of a relaxing time.
So
More
convenience,
about
ease of
that.
use, sociability, and things like that. Okay.
I think that's what it is. There are a lot of considerations when you walk in there as well. I don't know if this is something for others, but there was a story that went around about people putting needles on seats and
Yeah.
those
So that's where I am as well. Exactly the same, Pete. Is the needle
yeah.
story. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so, Steve, it's probably not true, but I mean, every time you go in there and you sit on these seats in the dark, there's sort of that. Yeah, theaters start out and they're shiny and, very attractive. And then over time, the quality of the facilities sort of goes backwards. I mean, it's very nasty to go out into to the ablution facilities and so on. Yeah, so, all of those things
Okay, good.
kind of
Good.
play a role. In South Africa, you kind of have to drive everywhere.
Yeah.
There's no, public transport and so on. So there's a lot of hassle sometimes that comes along with actually planning and going out, right? But I mean, I think that's unique to SA. If I was in New York or in London and I could take the tube and do it quickly, and it might be different.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. Thanks. Kamani, what about yourself?
Well, for me, we are great Marvel fans in this home. So we love the movies, not necessarily going out. But the main attraction is, especially if there's a new Marvel movie, it's around the sound quality. So we will travel to a movie house that has the best sound quality that we are
Right.
aware of. So it's that, and it's also around the cleanliness. And when you walk in, it either smells nice or it smells dirty. And
Yeah.
we generally try to get that particular house that does have the cleanliness piece. And those pieces actually equal to, the human experience that we actually are into the movie, we are present at that time.
Yeah.
So that's what attracts us and keeps us going. But like Alden has mentioned, I mean, we huge on digitization in this home. So everything we stream, we don't necessarily even have to leave our homes to do anything. So even if we miss something, we will catch it, down the stream somewhere along. But in terms of going to the movie house, what keeps us going is that particular piece, is those two pieces that I mentioned.
Okay. And Yogesh, anything to add there?
I'm probably going to be a bit biased because I used to be the chief experience officer at one of the movie houses. But I think for me, it is the journey to the actual cinema and the journey in the cinema, from getting your ticket through to getting your food, and then also what's available on the menus from a food perspective. Is there self-service and the avoidance of queues as far as possible? And then also, just for me, if I had to think about different segments or different customer types, for a mom that wants to do shopping and she leaves the kids at the movies, she wants it to be safe and she wants it to be secure, and she wants them to come out of there and catch them and get back into the car and go back home. For a couple that's going out on a date, you probably want, a little bit of a romantic, private viewing, a little bit more luxury, open seats, and less hassle. So I don't want to stand in a queue to get my food. I'd rather order it and get it delivered to me. But I think everything that everybody else mentioned now, as well as, I suppose, the queue and the journey in the cinema, is actually integral, and just moving between the number of people that are on the floor 5 minutes before the movie starts. And I suppose screen, visuals, sound, all of that plays a big role as well.
So all those things that we were saying, and honestly, I didn't know you'd worked in movie theaters before, but the reason for asking the question is it's a very pertinent one, in terms of if movie theater businesses organize themselves around what customers perceived as being successful. So the comfort of the seats, the sound quality, the cleanliness of the facilities, low price concessions. They get you in as a loss leader with the ticket, and then of course they whack you with a big margin on top of the concessions. Those theaters that focused on those things that you and I really value would naturally deliver a better profitability and an improved level of service and so on. So those things that we would normally think about from a business perspective as being our metrics which tell us whether we're achieving success, they perhaps don't go far enough sometimes. Because if for instance, if cleanliness was top of the agenda, which it always should be, shouldn't it? Those hygiene factors. If we're thinking about those types of things, then would you get that on a dashboard which sort of says, what's the cleanliness of your toilets, for instance? Well, you wouldn't see that on necessarily on a top executive dashboard, unless there'd been some issue with it, unless there'd been some reports, some sort of customer feedback, in a negative way. But if we focused ourselves on the needs of our customers and delivered those, we get the cost revenue service benefits from that. So rather than focus deliberately on the outputs, let's focus on the outcomes. And in focusing on the outcomes, the outputs will follow. We're going to see that in spades on day 3 and day 4, when we actually create that model which connects everything to everything else. But it doesn't stop at outputs. And I'll give you a couple of examples of case studies of organizations who fail by only measuring to the output level. In other words, measuring what we're doing rather than measuring what we deliver. So rather like yesterday, where we talked about the difference between the industry you're in and the business you're in, it's the same type of thinking. So one of the things that resonates with top teams when we're doing sort of big transformation programs is being able to demonstrate that sometimes the focus on metrics associated with cost are misplaced. You've got to focus directly on the experience that you wish to create, right? And measure that experience, not measure the output of the journey. If that's making sense. If it doesn't, don't worry, because we do get into that more as we get into the material. Right. So I just wanted to put that one out there. Victoria's on the call now. Hi, Victoria.
Hey, good morning.
Well, I imagine it's some unearthly hour with you now. So
Yeah, 2:30.
yeah, 2:30 in the morning. Hey, what? I was thinking, like, I was just talking with a colleague of mine who's just sort of turning in for the night over in Denver, and it's just just after midnight there, and I was sort of saying, okay, when I'm in the UK, I've seemed to be in a much more global friendly time zone, except for all my friends and people back and my neighbors over in Colorado. But so welcome to joining us in the wee small hours. So did you get up early, or you haven't been to bed yet?
Well, no, actually, yeah, I got up early. Went to bed late, got up early. You know how that works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and especially in calls with Australia, I've been doing things like at 3 a.m. in UK time for Australians, and that's great fun. You really feel the vibe. Let's put it that way. So, any observations on your cinema experience?
Um, so I, so I picked, let's see, my top three were cleanliness, comfortable seating, and food and drink options. I want variety.
Okay.
So and here, so I'm in the United States. I live in Maryland, and a lot of times there's a theater over in Virginia that I will go to because they have the most cushiony. I mean, you literally fall asleep, which is bad, but the seats are so comfortable and they vibrate, with whatever the movie is. But cleanliness, I don't care where I go. Cleanliness is the number one thing. I want clean bathrooms. I want, of course, clean seats. And I know this is probably going to sound weird, but I really do look at the popcorn makers.
Yeah.
Like if they're real greasy and kind of gross looking, I'm like, no popcorn for me.
And how often would you see those things on the executive dashboard? And those are you've just highlighted, haven't you? Those are the most important things to us as customers. And yet the executive dashboard, we'd be looking at, what margin are we making on concession sales? Can we bump the price up there or change that? Whereas the factors that influence yours and my decision about which theatre we go to are usually based around the outcome we'd like to achieve. The sociability, the comfort, as you said, the seats being part of the experience. And we say, yeah, well, it's important to have those seats in, but we're operating at very low margins these days, and the footfall's decreasing. Therefore, we've got to cut costs or cut corners and things like that. But the places that really succeed, and this applies not obviously just to movie theaters, but in every walk of life, those people that really focus on creating a successful outcome for customers do so much better than those people who are focusing simply from old style operational type metrics, counting what we're doing. So I'll give you another example of that in terms of if you're thinking about call centers, and this is always a bugbear with me, obviously, during my experiences, both in corporate land, working with as a consultant, and then working with organizations who do this, is if you have a call center, what are your primary measures around?
How fast can you answer the phone? How
Yeah.
fast can you get off the phone?
Yeah. So they're all going to be doing things.
Yeah.
But let's just do a little sleight of mouth thing here. And sleight of mouth is, I've got a book which I'll show you this afternoon, which I recommend. It's nothing to do with process or customer experience or technology, and everything to do with the language that we use. And it's called Sleight of Mouth by a guy called Robert Dilts. And I'll tell you more about that later. But the sleight of mouth would be, what if we called our call centers customer experience centers? What would our primary measures then be in a customer experience center? Yeah.
Kind of more along like the customers. Well, I want to satisfaction kind of is that where they're thinking, which is
Well, it would be, we're dealing with customers. If our focus is on calls and what we're doing, so average handle time, abandon rates, and things like that, those are the really important things to the employees because that's what we pay them to do. Whereas if we said, look, no, you're in a customer experience center, this is where the customers have experiences with us. Now let's quantify what a great experience looks like. Well, the great experience is going to be one that delivers a successful outcome. So our measures there would shift from being output based again to become outcome based, the result of the experience. And
okay.
I'll tell you a very quick story. One of my colleagues, he runs an investment bank in London. and I've known him since he was a lad. Anyhow, he set this investment bank up about 10 years ago, and a couple of years ago, he called me, and they're very successful. And being an investment bank, of course, the numbers are high, dealing with high net worth individuals and things like that. And he said, Steve, you know, and we do an annual sort of Christmas get together if we can. So I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I am in the UK, so I might stand more chance than when I'm normally in Colorado. And when at that Christmas get together a couple of years ago, he said, Steve, I want you to come in. I want you to hypnotize my people. And I said, what do you mean hypnotize your people? He said, well, he said, they're all so demotivated these days. He said, I don't know what, you know, we've been going like 8 years and yeah, well, we're achieving a level of success, he said. And I get all this stuff you're talking about all the time. You know, the customer's the most important part and aspect of our organization and our business and stuff. And we should focus on the success of a customer. He said, oh, it's not as if I don't bang the drum on that. He said, so I want you to come in and hypnotize them and re-motivate them, re-energize them, rekindle the fire in the bellies. I want them to really have a passion for the customer. So I said, well, what's gone wrong? And he said, I really don't know. And it's like 70% of them are the people I recruited when we started the business. And he said it was great then. We had a fantastic team dynamic and everybody was happy and so on. So I said, well, obviously, ethically, I can't hypnotize them without their permission. But before we go down that road, can I sort of come in and see what's going on? He said, yeah, come on. He said, I do a management by walkabout thing on every Wednesday. So, of course, I rearranged the diary, go down to London on the Wednesday, just before Christmas. And he said, yeah, come on this walkabout. We'll go out on the what he calls the investment floor, which to you and me would be the call center, customer experience center. But because you're dealing with high net worth individuals, these people are not just following scripts. You know, they're not just there like chickens in battery cages. They're individuals who earn a very large salary themselves. So we do the walkabout, and he pulls a team together while we're on the floor. And he said, hi, this is Steve, longtime colleague, blah, blah, blah. Guys, I want you to really focus on customer success this week. I know I keep going on about this, but it's the most important thing. And at the end of the day, they're paying our salaries. So I want you to really, really focus on customer success. Do we all get that? And they're like, yeah. And he nudges me, he says, see what I mean? They're not in the groove. They're not getting it. You know, I don't understand. He said, look, customers, beginning, the end, the middle, everything. I want you to really focus on customer success. Are we okay with that? And yeah. And anyhow, the guy was a bit frustrated, so he said, "Come on, let's go to the canteen." So we go down to the canteen, have a coffee and stuff. He said, "I can't leave it there." He said, "I've got to go back." He said, I'm obviously not getting my point across." So we go back up there as well, and he pulls them together again, and they're all like somewhat distracted and sort of sitting around, and they're like, "Oh, how long is this going to be this time?" And he said, "Guys, Steve's here because he's an expert in process, customer experience, and all things under the sun which are to do with transforming businesses to be successful. So he puts the customer first. I've been his customer, I've been his friend, I've been his colleague. I want you to put the customer first. I want you to really think in every conversation you're going to have today about what does success look like for my customer. Make sure that everything you're doing delivers that. Do we get that? No. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, we've got to get that average handle time down to less than 3 minutes. Right. And there you have it. If we measure the wrong things, people get smart at doing dumb stuff. So if what you're saying to me, the most important aspect of my work in this place now is how long it takes me, then I'm going to make damn well sure if that's linked to the reward system that I achieve those targets that you're giving me. So frequently in call centers, we make the mistake that we're managing calls. No, you're not. We're creating customer experiences. So one of the sleights of mouth that you can do is just simply rename the call center to the customer experience center. It changes the dynamic straight away and shifts the focus away from measuring what we're doing to begin to measure what we're delivering. So when I explained this all to him, and of course he then changes the structure to sort of say, look, you need to be on the call for as long as it takes to deliver that customer success. I don't want you hanging up or asking them to call back or, you know, all those other things. Now in the lean world, we would have done a lot of things about, you know, failure demand and all those classic things. We're focusing in the wrong place. We should focus on the outcome we want to achieve. Make sure we can really articulate that in terms of the metrics, which tell us we're achieving that outcome. And then the rest will look after itself. There's a little video, some of you might have already had the chance to see it, of one of the example videos I put in there. And it's Jeff Bezos talking about customer obsession. And essentially what he says, look, if you become customer obsessed, right, and everything is oriented around customer obsession rather than competitor obsession, much of everything else that you're trying to do will fix itself. And so we're going to explore that territory in terms of the root cause of all work. Organizations sometimes miss that. They start trying to fix the wrong things, or, you know, as if you're moving the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. It doesn't actually change the direction of the ship. What it does is it just makes the disaster look nicer. So any observations? Oh, sorry, Victoria, I cut across before you'd finished sharing with me your sort of inner secrets of cinemas and theatres. So.
Oh no, that was great, Stephen. And now after you said about renaming, I was like, that actually could work. Because you're talking about the changing kind of the culture, of what they're used to doing. In addition, you're also thinking about not just the customer experience, but also, the staff experience. I'm sure they don't like rushing people off the phone. And it probably gives them a better sense of satisfaction to know that they've actually assisted that customer the way the customer needs to be handled versus the way they need to meet metrics.
Yeah.
So
And it's simple things like that which shift people's focus, because it's naturally a question to ask, again, at a C level. So what are our measures of success? And if all the measures of success, one of the pieces of audit work that we do, and I don't normally discuss this until we get into day 4, go in and ask the organization, what industry are you in? No, that's wrong. Try again. What business are you in? That mess with their heads on that. And then secondly, okay, guys, what I want you to do is to write down your top 10 key performance indicators for your division, your department, wherever you're from. So say I've got 10 folks in the room, and so at the end of it, we have 100 metrics, right? So we get those up on the wall and we say, right, okay, I want you to color code the metrics. I want you to do that RAG analysis, red, amber, green, right? And I want you to mark in red, highlight in red, all those things which are a measure of output. So if it was a call center, for instance, it's how many calls have we had today? What was the average handle time? What was the abandon rate? So I want you to mark all those types of measures, output measures, in red. And I want you to mark measures which are measures of the outcome you've achieved on behalf of the customer in green. So typically what we'll find, and it's not a mistake of organizations, because we've used an industrial age paradigm to structure ourselves fairly typically into functional specialist silos, right? The measures will be about what this function is all about. So if I'm in finance, obviously it's going to be finance measures. If I'm in operations in sales, and so on like that. But all across the board, if say I've got 100 measures, typically 80% of those measures will be red. There'll be measures of outputs, measures of what we're doing, and only 20% will be green. Now, what happens as organizations mature to become more customer-centric and customer-obsessed is the number of measures you need to have reduces significantly, because if you're focused on outcome, to get the outcome right, you have to do the outputs right. And it's not that we stop measuring outputs. No, they're still important to us. So in a call center, in experience center, we still want to know how many calls we've got and what's the average handle time, because that allows us to do our utilization planning and capacity management and things. But they're not the important measures anymore. The important measures become the outcome. And in which case, for mature outside in organizations, the number of measures you've got can reduce by up to 50%, right? The top table measures, and the balance of the measures you've then got shifts the other way. So there'll be 80% measuring outcome and only 20% measuring outputs. A good example would be, for instance, if you've got project management offices, program management offices, what do they measure in that environment? Well, they measure projects coming in on time, to budget, and achieving the deliverables. And they get a big sort of green check mark, big green tick to sort of say, yeah, we've done that. That's great. But if the deliverables are not aligned to helping contribute to a successful customer outcome, again, you might be getting really smart at doing dumb stuff. So we've got to ensure that, simply put, everything that we're doing contributes to successful customer outcomes. Right? The way I'm banging this drum, you'd think, oh, it's all about the customer, isn't it? No, if you go and listen to any of Richard Branson's talking about this, he would say, yeah, the primary customer, without it, we don't have a business. But his most important customer inside the organization is the internal customer, is the employee. Because without giving the employee the right tools and the techniques and the capabilities and the skill set, they can't deliver a successful outcome for the customer. So it all fits together in a very logical way. It's just that when we start to introduce this into organizations who've organized themselves into those pyramids, functional specialist silos, they don't get it because they're competing against each other internally to get their metrics to be the ones that they can deliver, not realizing that while they're doing that, they might be screwing over another department. So I've got a couple of little metaphors to talk about that later. So you can introduce that in the conversation and give that sort of the folks you're talking with that ha moment where they will get it before you need to tell them how to get it. They'll realize it for themselves. And that's like we learn as kids, isn't it? It's like the best learning is where you create the situation for the kids to get it, rather than sort of saying, okay, this is what I need you to learn now. So sorry, I get so passionate about this stuff. It's particularly the sort of movie theatre. So you guess apparently Eldon says you're the reason why popcorn is so expensive in South Africa. What's he talking about there?
I'm not gonna support that statement with a response. I'm just gonna.
You're not going to go down that rabbit hole then.
Yeah,
No, I understand
I'll
that.
catch him on the flip side of this session.
I'm sure you'll get your own back later. So yeah, so the theatre thing, and as I said, doing what I call the KPI audit, right, is a very simple thing to do to demonstrate where is your focus. Whilst we're in that territory now, I might as well tell you the story that normally I tell on day 3. Co-founder of the BP Group is a guy called John Core. And John is an expert. He's an Irish chap, so he has a terrific sense of humour. But he's an expert in what Victoria will know in the States is Chapter 11 reversals. So if an organisation gets itself into some sort of debt and is approaching bankruptcy, they can go and ask for protection from the courts while they sort out the business. And that's called Chapter 11 and latterly Chapter 15 as well. And John's an expert in reversing out of Chapter 11. So in association with one of our partners, a company called ACX Partners, who do this Chapter 11 stuff, this one particular week, John's, as I say, he's based in London now, and he's an Irish guy, but he lives in Ireland, lives in the States, and he's rather like myself, living all over the place. And he has this trip to go to Detroit. And Victoria, you might remember this, about 10 years ago, General Motors went into Chapter 11 protection.
Yes.
Excuse me, got that frog in the throat again this morning. And what that allows them to do is to stop people collecting money from them while they get their own house in order, present a business case to a judge who then says, yeah, I'll sign that off. You can carry on doing business. This is how you're going to do it. So John's in there, he's in Detroit. And at the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, usually, is we do a wrap-up call wherever our coaches and trainers are. So I phoned John. I said, how's it going, John? And he said, well, I'm down here in the production line in Detroit. And the guys in production within the factory are in complete denial that General Motors is having all these problems. So I said, how can that be? He said, well, I look around the walls, and on the walls, they've got dashboards, and they've leaned themselves out. They've done all that other good stuff. They've become very efficient and very effective and stuff. And they're not just in the upper quartile of the car industry, the automotive industry around the world. They're in the top 10%. You know, the dashboards are in the top 10%. So these guys here in production are in denial that General Motors has this problem. And I said, well, it's a very easy problem to see. You can see it in the numbers. You know, they've been making a loss for several quarters in, you know, and the market is like saying they're a disaster these days. How can that be? So John said, well, I have a simple observation. They're measuring the wrong things. They're measuring output rather than outcomes. So the genius of that, and General Motors are now one up there again with being the top, is to get balanced measures on people's scorecards. So not just measure what you're doing in your department, but share the outcome measures across. So the genius there wasn't to do with changing the workforce or changing the factory and whatever. The genius there was to get outcome measures on. And what is the outcome of you making a car from a business perspective? What would the outcome be?
Customer buying it.
Yeah. Again, this isn't brain surgery, is it? The customer buys the car. And so when we looked at the outcome measures, which were over on the sales side of the organization, the truth became obvious. They'd got really good at making cars that nobody wanted anymore. Right? They'd lost the connection with the customer need, that territory we explored yesterday. So they got really efficient and effective at doing stuff, making cars, that sort of a thing, that nobody desired anymore. Right? So the shift there was to get a balance of outcome measures into the production planning cycle, and vice versa into the sales and marketing cycle, get a balance of production measures. Right? And once they start to share that, of course, the conversation breaks out between production and sales. Guys, why didn't you tell me you weren't selling the cars? Because we got really efficient and effective here. We're one of the best in the world, for getting the wheels on, for actually painting the cars, for actually doing the internals, for getting them off the production line faster than ever. Why on earth didn't you tell us you weren't able to sell them? And they go, well, that's what we try and do, is sell them. So let's share some of these measures. And then the conversation sort of erupts on, well, how could we connect the work in a better way? So we're not thinking of it in this functional, very linear, left to right, top to bottom type idea, but we're thinking of it is we're actually creating the experience as we build the car. Now, is everything we're doing aligned with the experience? So Hallmark cards, expression, as we discussed yesterday. Is everything I'm doing, every atom in my body, every bit of work I'm involved with, contributing to us achieving expression on behalf of our customers? And people go, well, it's a bit nebulous, isn't it? It's a bit sort of, and he said, no, it's not. It's very objective. It's very measurable. It's very tangible. The fact you haven't done it up until this point is part of the problem. If you start doing it, things will change immediately. So that's part of the, so General Motors, John did his thing. General Motors came out of Chapter 11, and then people were saying, my goodness me, what a transformation they made. How did they become so customer oriented after for so many years making cars that were obsolete effectively? Right? Well, they got outcome measures on everybody's scorecard. So I'll share that with you in the sort of spirit of saying that there are very few organizations on the planet who wouldn't benefit from looking at how they measure success and changing those measures from what we think of as factory industrial age production type measures to being outcome based measures in and around the success of a customer. So customer experience centers, why not? Because even though we said, yeah, but it's still a call center, you go, yeah, but, you're calling it a different name. So the mindset that comes with the different name is like, so shouldn't we be measuring more of the customer experience in here? You go, da-da.
Hey, Steve, quick question for you.
Yeah,
For all the customers that you've worked with, have you found that typically they use the same KPIs that they've been using, for the past decade?
Absolutely. And in the areas that you work in government, naturally, I can't talk about specifics to do with people like the DoD and people like that. But that's the nub of the problem. When you're doing the root cause analysis, and we're going to talk about what's the cause of all work, is if you center your measures around the root cause of all work, it doesn't demean the other measurements that you've got. It just sort of says they're not as superior as this main measurement. So you're quite right. In organizations, we've inherited a way of working which worked for the best part of 200 years, right? It worked since Adam Smith in 1776, Wealth of Nations, coincident with, the US becoming a nation in its own right and adopting that economic model. For 200 years, all the stuff we're talking about that we might be complaining about at the moment worked. It's just it began to fail 30 or so years ago. It began to fail because you and I as customers became enlightened and so on. So likewise, we have to understand that the needs have shifted. Our counterparts a couple of generations ago, we wouldn't accept that level of service anymore. We'd rebel about it. We'd complain about it. So in the government circles, for instance, just a very slight story. I won't get into this in detail because we'll digress too much. But I was working with the Internal Revenue Service for the folks who don't know the IRS, and as I'm a dual citizen, I pay some of my taxes in the States and some back here in the UK. So I wanted to do this work within the IRS, and it was the first day. I was talking to some of the senior leadership team, and so I start going on about the Triple Crown. Everything you do has got to be aligned with the Triple Crown. You're going to measure all the success of all your initiatives by how much you've reduced cost, by how much you've improved service, and by how much you've grown revenue. And immediately I say that, one of the guys says, "Oh, Steve, forget about revenue. We're a government entity where revenue is not important to us." So I said, how can revenue not be important to you? It's your middle name, the IRS. How can it not be? And he said, no, you don't understand. we get given a contribution from, we get an allocation from the government every year, right? And from that, we then go and spend it. So from our point of view, revenue is not important. So at that point, I'm getting a little bit like, hang on a minute, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a citizen, and that revenue that you get doesn't come from the government. It comes from we, the citizen, right? That's where it's coming from. And we're really passionately interested now that not only is the money being spent wisely, but that year on year, you should be able to do the same thing that you did last year. You should be able to do it for less cost, right? Well, you know, then the discussion breaks out. Yeah, it's not revenue, it's contribution. So whatever you call it, it's the lifeblood of the organization. Without it, you can't run the organization. So if you're not trying to improve it, what are you doing to get more for the same and then subsequently more for less? So this works in sort of the government circles, but you will meet, particularly if you're in, say, public sector organizations, this whole idea of it's not called revenue, it's called contributions or something like fund allocation or something like that. At the end of the day, where does that come from? Where is the primary customer who's actually supplying that funding? Then put that in context in terms of the delivery of success. Get those metrics changed. And that's a bit of an advanced subject when we haven't even got into root causes of work yet. But the whole idea would be, though, is another organization you might know of, Victoria, we work with quite extensively, the Nation Conservancy in Arlington. And know some very good people in there who've gone off and done some fantastic things in other places. But I can remember the first intervention there a few, 10 or so years ago, and we're working with those guys, and I banged the drum about Triple Crown again. They go, no, Steve, no, don't talk about revenue around here. Money is just capitalist. It's a dirty word around here. You know, we get contributions. People leave us contributions. People send us contributions. You know, so my natural question is, so how are you optimizing the receipt of contributions? Well, what do you mean optimize? Well, how are you getting more scientific about how you collect that money, how you disperse that money? You know, what percentage of that money is being spent on administration, support services? How much of the money that you're receiving is? And they're going, oh, no, you're making it sound like a bank. I'm going, no, it doesn't have to sound like a bank, but it's the optimal use of the contributions you receive. In a world where the focus is on, you know, people can't contribute in the way that they might have done in the past, how are you improving that? And it literally took like 2 months of having this discussion about the importance of contributions, because without it, you can't pay the salaries. You can't do these meaningful things like, you know, greening up the planet. You can't do any of that good stuff without figuring out where are our contributions coming from. And it literally was more by app and chance. Now, for those folks in the States who are not in the States, the Nature Conservancy is one of the world's largest entities, which is set up as a charitable organization. But what it's well known for now is in its contribution to sort of regrowing trees in places like the Amazon, for instance. And you go, well, how does that work then? So we had to figure out, one of the reasons why they weren't being as successful as they wanted was this contributions thing. So how can we get more contributions? Because if we get more contributions, we can pay the farmers in Colombia to stop growing drugs and start growing coffee. But the margins for drugs were bigger, you know, were more enticing, if you like. And they weren't growing drugs because they were evil drug barons. They were growing drugs because they need to feed the family. Well, if we get more contributions coming in, and we could supplement a salary for being a coffee maker, then we can green the planet in a more environmentally friendly, in a more ecologically friendly, in a more social friendly way. So this whole idea of Triple Crown plays out in, you know, every walk of life. But so often organizations will say, yeah, we measure cost, revenue, and service. And you go, well, stop measuring those things. Measure the outcomes which will deliver those things. Get them in the right sequence. Sorry, I'm gonna go off and start telling all these different stories, but you can see there's challenges that you meet, but oftentimes it is that sleight of mouth thing. Call it customer experience center, and that's happened in a number of organizations already in places like South Africa, where some of our partners have been doing work to just simply change a few things and get people thinking about the work they do and how it contributes to a successful customer outcome. Eldon,
Steve,
would you?
I've got a quick question. It's Eldon.
Please,
here.
yeah.
Do you come across the challenge elsewhere? I've I wonder here in South Africa sometimes, if you want budget approved, then you just throw the words customer experience in front of it. So suddenly it becomes, I don't know, customer experience marketing, customer experience finance. And the reason why I ask this is, isn't there a danger if you rename the call center to the customer experience center, then you're exactly causing the problem that we're trying to get away from, where people equate customer service to customer experience and suddenly score themselves very well in customer experience and those related metrics, when in fact what they're doing is operating the business customer support function, right? So is that a challenge that you see elsewhere?
It is, yes. And of course, that goes alongside the discipline. You need the right internal people on the ground that you've upskilled to actually understand that shift. It isn't just lipstick on the pig. It is about mindsets. It's also to that point we discussed briefly yesterday, which is unfortunately a lot of customer experience is perceived as being soft and fluffy. It is like the new marketing, it is the new brand strategy and so on like that, but it isn't. Customer experience, that experience is everything our organization does. So we're always creating experiences. It's just that we've always thought of them as being processy things before. But that experience should touch everybody in the organization. So to that observation, Eldon, I would agree with you. If you haven't got the 2 or 3 people on the ground who are running those types of, running the call center, and it really is it's a liberation for some of those folks when they sort of start to think of themselves as customer experience centers. And yes, customer service comes into that. But if everything I'm doing as an employee is contributing to the experience, to an experience we're creating for our customers, then reasonably I should be measuring that. And those measures shouldn't be soft and fluffy. They shouldn't be subjective and retrospective. I'm going to get on my high horse tomorrow probably about NPS and CSAT and stuff like that, because those perceptual measures do a disservice to people in the customer experience space. We need to have objective, factual measures which are looking forward, leading measures rather than lagging measures. And so NPS, without getting into digging the hole today, is nothing wrong with Fred Reichheld, great guy, Bain & Co., fantastic people. But this whole idea that, the one metric rules them all is one of the reasons why we get that disassociation at the C level, because naturally you'd expect if we improve our NPS score, we should get some correlation though with an improvement in terms of return on the work that we're doing. Our revenue should go up. Generally speaking, customer service, if we're doing surveys and feedback, should be improving as well, and our costs should be coming down. But so frequently it's held in isolation and the correlation doesn't exist. And we've seen this over and over again. And then the worst possible thing people can do is go and link CSAT and NPS with bonus schemes. Because what will happen then? Well, people will game the system. And I'm going to give you some examples of that as well. One particular example from the automotive industry, where in the end they had to let the whole CX team go. And for like 6 months after that, every time I was having a conversation about this, they throw that in as being the failure of CX. It wasn't. It was the failure of human nature to want to game the system to get a bonus when they didn't deserve one. So you're quite right, Eldon. I agree with you there, is that if you were just putting lipstick on the pig and changing just the name, but it's the mindset in association with that. And you need to grow the internal leadership around that, and not necessarily the leadership at the C level. I mean, the people who are actually doing the work, those people who get that aha moment and go, oh, wow, I never really thought about it like that before. But yeah, I agree with you. And these measures that we've had in the past, I agree we should still have them because they allow us to figure out our capacity management systems. But if we focused our emphasis on delivering these outcomes, then yeah, we wouldn't have failure demand. Failure demand will go away because if we're aiming to deliver the outcome every time, fantastic. So,
I think, Steve, from my side, I think you definitely got a supporter in me with the thinking around NPS and CSAT and the way we've grabbed onto it and the way it's been sold as well. I think I often use the word irresponsible when it comes to that, because we sold the silver bullet in that one number and people grabbed onto it because everybody wants a quick and easy around this. Yeah. I think so we actually, what we're finding on our side is that we're having to go in and undo a lot of that thinking before even having the conversation around what are your CX outcomes, and let's start putting ourselves really in the customer shoes and having these great discussions. The other thing that I wanted to, and I know that it's probably off topic right now, but so we definitely experience this where there's the lack of understanding, and we spend I think you don't move until you get that understanding of what customer experience really is. Until once you get that, then only can you actually move with all the other different building blocks that make up your CX strategy and the CX culture that you're trying to build. When you encounter things like, okay, AI is the real, it used to be digital experiences previously, and you had there's always some new word out there in the market, and people grab onto it without taking care of the basics, which is what we're talking about, but it's the critical basics, right? How would and I suppose at some point ourselves, we need to be bold enough to say the right things and listen to the response, and hopefully you'd be able to counter the response. But when you have a business that is, we're going to do AI because AI is the next great thing, and in order to survive and optimize costs, and we're going to go AI, and there's a whole lot of budget around AI. Now, whilst you understand that through your observations and assessments and all of that, you understand that maturity of the level of the business is not really great. How do you rein in that horse that's going AI while still understanding that the basics of why they're doing business has been lost?
Okay, so without getting opening up this sort of Pandora's box question, because we do cover that in on day 4. What I would just say is that, and this is probably born out of it is born out of direct experience. When I go into an organization, what I want them to articulate for me very quickly is, what is the biggest problem that you've got at the moment, right? And they might say something like, well, it's it's digitizing everything, or it's putting AI into all our, and you say that's not a problem. That's something you're doing. What is the problem you're trying to solve at the moment, right? So that with the sort of credibility that we've got, we can of course sort of say, they'll say, why do you want to focus on the problem? So, well, I want to demonstrate to you the value that can be created if we focus on the customer experience. And they'll go, yeah, but it's not a customer service problem. It doesn't matter. What's the biggest problem that you've got? And you've got to be insistent on that. And it's almost like the blank sheet of paper question to do with re-engineering is, sure. I want to understand what your biggest problem is, because we're going to fix that in a week. And they'll go, no, that's impossible. You can't do it. And you go, oh, look, state for me, please. What is your big, and drive that. And then at the end of that first week, and by the time we've done the 4 days, we'll see that. By the end of that first week, you've made a case for fixing that problem, where 50% of the elements associated with that problem can go away in the next month. And yeah, it's not credible to say that up front. So it's not credible to go into an organization and say, I can give you an 80 and 90% improvement on cost, revenue, and service. They're not going to believe you, because they've probably spent the best part of half a century, some people, in terms of, trying to get these incremental changes and stuff, whereas the mindset of what we're doing is the issue. So yeah, to that thing about AI is not even to enter into the debate, because it'll be somebody's championing it. There'll be another article in Harvard Business Review about it, or Forbes will be talking about it. And then all of a sudden it becomes the new bright, shiny box that everybody is attracted to. But that's great. But if we can get factually about what is the thing that's not working in our organization, or alternatively, sometimes it's what is the opportunity we want to pursue with these new products and services. And then things like AI, I'll tell you where I have the other, the real bugbear. And of course, it is almost like, software snake oil is RPA. So robotic process automation. It's as if this stuff is all new. I can go back to the 1980s, right? And I can show you AI as we were doing it then, to take a mortgage process, a home loan process, and actually improve it. I can talk about automating transactional work, so that people can get the you know, bank balance and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
it's all, I won't say it's window dressing, but it's the latest snake oil that software companies and consultants want to sell us, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to get past that and get problem oriented. So if we can fix a problem, they'll go, yeah, but it's not a CX problem. You got, right, okay, let's forget what we're going to call it. What's the biggest problem, the biggest issue that's within your remit and control that you need to fix? And how would you know that you've been successful in fixing that? And then focus people's attention on that rather than getting involved in the politics about, you know, whether this is the right thing to do or not, or you're thinking wrong. It's the learn by doing thing. And I'm a very strong advocate in business is that ask a few pointed questions so that to some extent you'll make yourself like, I don't like those questions you keep asking us, because the implication of that is that a lot of what we're doing isn't necessary. Yeah.
I was going to say, you know, sometimes you do sound broken record, and sometimes you have to go ahead and be a broken record because you're repeating yourself. But at some point through the repetition and the pointy statements and questions, the penny does drop.
Yeah.
But doesn't always happen the first time round. So it's good to hear that I'm not going mad.
No. One last point on that, and talking about the repetition, is I reading about Bill Clinton's life and his you know, his coming into politics and why he did that and stuff like that. And one of the questions the interviewer was asking Bill was, so give us an insight into, you know, how politicians do their work. You know, what is the craft? You know, what is the skill set and so on. And what he related was one of the things that he learned early on was that the way we're wired, the way our sort of brains work, is that we hear things and we either resonate with it or we don't. Well, there were some studies done back in the 1980s, which were, if you say the same thing to a person 7 times, and of course this will be a mean average, there's going to be outliers, but if you say the same thing to a person 7 times in a slightly different way, they will begin to perceive that thing that you're saying as the truth. So I mentioned sleight of mouth earlier on, and Robert Dilts did a lot of study on this. And in his university thesis, he was writing about why is it that when we talk about like superheroes, and we talked about Marvel a few minutes ago and people like that, when we have those sort of Adonises or super women or things like that, they look charismatic and they look fantastic, and they've got all the attributes that we would think of as being a superhero, right? Why is it in the real world it's not like that? So leaders, good and bad, right, don't look like this. You know, think of Adolf Hitler for a minute, taking us off subject again, but a small guy from Austria with dark hair and a little mustache, and he was talking about the Aryan race, the blonde, the blue eyes, and all that other sort of racist stuff, right? So how did he galvanize a nation to believe that that was their truth? That was something that they should believe in. And it's Dilt's contention that it's the use of language. So great people, you know, like Mahatma Gandhi, you know, and talking with sort of South Africans, we don't need to talk too much about Nelson Mandela, but those sort of people, what is it that they were able to do that other people weren't able to do? And it's the use of language. So Clinton's insight was in understanding that if I have to say the same thing to get people to believe it, I'm going to say the same thing at least 7 times, but in a slightly different way each time.
Sure.
And unfortunately, we're hardwired, the majority of us, to begin to believe there must be some element of truth in that. You know, people keep telling me the earth is flat, and 99 out of 100 people tell me the earth is flat. Therefore, it must be true. It's just the psychology of it. So to that point about sounding like a broken record, the nuance on that is to find, and it's quite interesting, you know, as you know, I play chess quite a lot. So it's like looking at different variations. You still want to get to the same goal, you know, it's still the same objective, but how can I navigate? How can I have this conversation again, but not sound like a broken record? How can I relate it in such a way that it's going to resonate? And so I tend to use a range of tactics depending on the type of mindset that I'm working with to help them get it. And you might say, well, that's underhand, you know, saying things that you go, politicians are doing it to us all the time.
Yeah. Well, marketers are doing that to us all the time as well.
They are. Yeah, of course. And if we understand the psychology of that, we can use that to our benefit for good purpose, you know, rather than devious purpose. But so any
Steve,
other observations before we move into the material?
Steve, just a quick question.
Yes, please.
Tell me, in terms of typical customer experience metrics, in your opinion, what are some of the examples?
I'm going to show you on day 4, we'll actually do dashboards. And on those dashboards, there's 20 odd different measures, which are all going to be based around this next thing we're going to talk about, which is the root cause of work. And they're measures that objectively, when we put them out there, we're measuring as much scientifically as we can. We're measuring the actual, not just the things that we're doing, but the outcomes we're achieving. Whereas measurements tend to be the vast number of measurements we've got as if we're all still working in factories. You know, they're about how much have we done today? How many people did we need to do it? And things like that, which is to do with production type management. It's where, you know, I was an industrial engineer. I was culpable in that, you know, creating measurement systems which just measure what we do all the time. So objective measures, there's 20 odd of them. When we get to the dashboard, you'll see them. But this next piece of work we're going to do will begin to take us into that area. So we're going to look at what we call customer experience process diagnostics. So why diagnostics? Well, if we can fix those things, that's telling us where things are going wrong. If we can fix those things, we'll be okay. I'm going to introduce you to the customer experience innovation. So I teased you yesterday, we sort of saying 70, 80, 90% improvements. And until you do this innovation thing, it's not plausible. But when you've done the innovation thing, you can never actually look at a customer experience in the same way again, when you realize what benefits you can get from improving it that way. We'll talk about customer experience life cycles and Abacus model and how Google use those sort of things. And then we'll introduce this thing called the disruption factor. So talking about, are we being negatively disruptive to ourselves as an organization by not doing things in the right way? Or are we being disruptive in the industry and the business that we're in? To those people around us. So either disruptive in a positive sense to give the customer a new set of expectations we know we can deliver against, right? Disruptive in a competitive sense. If we're in a for-profit situation, how do we help this organization disrupt the market? How can we do that? And that's all tied in with innovation again. So that's going to be our theme. So let's dive into it. So innovation. So let's think about this for a minute. It's not as though we don't have a lot of innovation tools around there, and there's a ton of places you can go and read about innovation. So where this comes from is we used to refer to this as the Apple innovation formula, because guess where it came from? Yeah, Apple, right? And as you know, Jobs is on record of sort of saying, don't go and ask customers what they want, or let's not do, you know, raise the specter of Henry Ford again. If I go and ask them, you know, what they want, they'll say faster horses, right? We've got to get away from the want question. We've got to figure out what they need. And innovation allows us to do that, right? So it came out of Apple, and for several years, we had to refer to it as the Apple innovation approach. Now we call it the 6SI. So it's a 6 steps innovation, which is what I'm going to walk you through now. And creating those amazing customer experiences, the demonstration of its effectiveness is that it's going to deliver Triple Crown every time, reducing costs, growing revenues, enhancing service. So one of the concepts I need you to get, and most of us in the CX space will already have an inkling of what a moment of truth is this idea that any interaction with the customer is a moment of truth. For many years, people thought that the guy who'd written the book called Moments of Truth, this chap called Jan Carlson, was the inventor of the concept, but it wasn't. It was that guy called Richard Norman there on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can go and read about him. He was a well-known Scandinavian consultant. And in his university thesis, he was writing about customer interactions are the cause of all work. Right? And just sort of hold that one in mind, and I'll get to the reasons why and how we can use that to actually liberate ourselves in terms of processes and experiences. And Richard Norman wrote in his university thesis, look, there's 2 types of interactions we have. There's interactions as customers with organizations which are moments of misery, where things go wrong, it's where failure happens, right? And there's a counterbalance to that. There's interactions we have which are moments of magic, where everything goes well and everything works swimmingly and so on like that. And that was the basis of his observation. Jan Carlson, a few years later in the 1980s, picked up this work, and he was at the time president of Scandinavian Airlines. good regional airline in Europe, never noted for being exemplary. But over a period of 12 months, he had all his people look at all the moments of misery and then set about eradicating them. Right. And in doing that, Scandinavian for a number of years became a top player in global aviation business. Subsequently, Jan Carlson went away, wrote the book called Moments of Truth, and he talks about that story. He talks about how he did that. So for many years, people thought it was Jan Carlson who created the concept. He didn't. It was this guy, Richard Norman. Richard Norman is so well known in Sweden. They have an annual Richard Norman Day, right? So you imagine that. It's like Nelson Mandela Day. He's their equivalent, I suppose, in Sweden. And they have a bank holiday to celebrate Richard Norman's life. And he was one of the first people who, when I was reading his research and understanding where he was coming from, was really challenging the existing industrial age model. And this was back in the 1980s. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago, sort of somewhat prematurely. But the whole point of that is that once you understand this idea of the moment of truth, and not just the way he was with it, but how it's become so powerful as a mechanism for actually being able to understand and run business. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So moments of truth, we need to get that idea. And in terms of, let's have a look at this moment of truth idea. Any interaction with the customer is a moment of truth. And some of the people doing the work around this are people like Google. And a few years ago, 2011, they came up with this concept of the zero moment of truth, the ZMOT or the ZMOT, depending on where you are in the world, which is the interaction that we have with the customer, which precedes all other interactions. So we say, oh, that's the root cause of the root causes. Potentially, yes, it could be. They then took that work on further and sort of say, well, when we're thinking of moments of truth, we can abstract them at different levels. There's macro moments of truth. There's inexperienced moments of truth, sometimes referred to as in-process moments of truth. And then there's micro moments of truth. And a lot of our colleagues in the CX space that spend time doing customer journey maps, and don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with that, they'll be focused on the micro moments of truth, the emotion associated with these interactions and so on like that. And that's fine, as long as you understand that those aren't necessarily the root cause of all work. The root cause of all work are the in-process moments of truth, and I'll elaborate on that in a few minutes. A couple of reference points though. If this I'm going to skate over the surface of this, but there is a lot of research being done in and around moments of truth. So there's a couple of links there for you. Also, just go and Google moments of truth, and you will find, don't go and read the sort of, to go back 40 to 30 years and read that stuff. Read some of the latest stuff that's happening, because of course in our digitized world, and to the point about AI and RPA and all those sort of things, we can cut through that very easily by getting people instead to focus on moments of truth and what we need to do at a moment of truth. The moment of truth as well, in the sense that it is any interaction with the customer. We mentioned yesterday, if we're thinking customer life cycle, and from when the need arises to when the need is satisfied, is much broader than that process definition. And we were talking about aviation, somebody buying a ticket to fly, to getting off the bag off the carousel. If we're looking at that broader schema, that customer experience has always existed. But now if we embrace that, any interaction within that experience is a moment of truth. An argument against that would be people like British Airways saying, yeah, but we're not bothered about how you get to the airport, how you get home. And you go, well, why not? And you go, well, we fly airplanes. You go, yeah, that's what you do. But the business that you're really in is the creation of that travel experience, if you want to put it like that. So you should think about those things that are upstream and downstream of the things that you're doing ticket to carousel. And in which case you could be like Southwest Airlines and fix problems like lost and damaged bags and have only a 0.2% occurrence of that, contrast with 27, 30% with other organizations. If we fix that through the moments of truth lens, right, we're actually dealing with the root cause of all work. So sometimes you'll get, if you said this, you might be resistant to it, yeah, but you'll get the idea. And what's often said about moments of truth is, for any process experience that deserves to exist, there's an optimum number of moments of truth to deliver a desired successful customer outcome. So I liken this to, I make a pretense of being able to play golf. So one of the things I like about when I go out to South Africa, of course, is I stay at a particular golf resort, so that when I'm not actually working with the clients, I can get out and have a round of golf. And I make the pretense that I'm a good golfer, but I'll tell you, people in South Africa are really good golfers. But in golf, and what was it, a few days ago, the golf tournament in Atlanta, fantastic just to be able to watch that and just have a bit of escapism for a while. But in golf, what's the optimum number of strokes on any one hole? You know, what would be a fantastic result at any one hole? A hole in one?
So
No,
yeah, I was
two would
going
be
to say
good.
the
Yeah.
only one would be best, and then second would be anything under par for that hole, I suppose.
Yeah, of course, and that's a good result, isn't it? And golf courses, unfortunately, are not designed that we can get a hole in one on every hole, as we know. There's water hazards, there's sand traps, there's trees, there's all sorts of things going on. And exactly as you were saying, Alden, par is what would we expect that you know, a decent to average golf player will be able to get on any one hole. And typically, it's 3 or 4 strokes. And around 18 holes, that's probably something like 72 strokes. So we say par for the course is 72. So in that sort of context, anything less than 72 is better. Agreed? So we could say theoretically, what we're trying to do is get a hole in one on every hole. But in the real world, it doesn't work like that. There should be a par. There should be a number that we can think of that for this experience at the moment, what is the optimum number of moments of truth to deliver a desired successful outcome? And let's work it out. As CX engineers, let's go figure what the optimum should be now, based on our organization's maturity and understanding and technology, customer maturity, and so on like that. We could figure it out, and we're going to do that precisely. But also the moment of truth. Let's just go back to this idea. It is the cause of all the work that we do in organizations. And then I'll be talking to somebody, and the finance guys will say, yeah, no, we don't do moments of truth. And you go, what do you mean you don't do them? You say, well, we do all our work's internal, right? So moments of truth don't affect us. And they go, well, all the work that you're doing internally is created by moments of truth. And they go, how so? How does that work then? You go, well, without interactions with the customer, you wouldn't have anything to do anyhow. You wouldn't have money and funds and so on that you'd have to process. And marketing folks are classics on this. They go, yeah, well, we don't get involved with moments of truth because we're doing like strategic marketing planning. And you're going, yeah, you wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for the moments of truth. So in principle, we should be able to attach everything that we're doing back to a moment of truth or a collection of moments of truth. And if we were able to fix the moments of truth, so rather like Jan Carlson talks about moments of misery, but it's not just moments of misery, it's every single moment of truth. If we're able to fix that, then we change everything else within the organization. When you're talking about this in this sort of sense, is people, it's not going to be credible to them unless you can actually demonstrate it to them. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go through an innovation approach and show that by fixing the moments of truth, we can liberate any customer experience, any process, anywhere. One or two design ideas with moments of truth, and I'm very much of an advocate. If you find a moment of truth, let's see what action we could put in place which would remove it forever, even good moments of truth, and we'll have a look at that. So you're trying to remove or eliminate them progressively. So I'll give you some examples of organizations who've done that. Is if you're an Amazon Prime customer, when you've identified what it is you want to buy, there's what they call a BFB, a big flipping button. Let's use the F word, the flipping button. That BFB is when you press that button, it already knows all the information to do with how do you want to pay, where do you want the delivery to go to, when do you want that delivery to be, you know, what's your preferred, leave it in the porch, leave it in the lobby, you know, wherever, right? All the stuff that sits behind that button, right? And that button is a moment of truth. And what they've done is they've engineered all the things to do with procurement in and around that one moment of truth. So you don't, for instance, press the button and then it prompts you, how would you like to pay this time? You have to go through, choose your credit card again, and it knows your preferred method. So unless you're actually going to change your preferred method, it doesn't ask you, where do you want it delivered? It already knows that by default. It's already got all that information. So we can engineer our processes to be an optimum, theoretical optimum, one moment of truth. That's the ideal. But logically, as we say, the world isn't designed that way. We've inherited businesses working in with an industrial age paradigm, with people who are trained to be very transactional, with customers who have exceedingly high expectations, which we're not managing and not measuring. Right? So we have to think about, for any process experience we're going to look at, is what is the optimum number of moments of truth at the moment, and then engineer it accordingly in that direction. So let me introduce this innovation 6-step approach, and just by way of a sort of a backstory let's get into this, and then I'll explain the backstory as we go through it. So we've broken this down into 6 steps, so any organization can do it. They don't have to get CX or process. They don't have to have had previous experience. So this is one of the sort of central themes about how you can innovate anything, but not needing necessarily to get people sort of trained and qualified and certified and accredited and so on before they understand this stuff. So identify a customer experience, usually one that needs fixing. Document moments of truth, and I'll show you how to do that. Determine the actions that would eliminate the moments of truth. Assess the value of those actions, and then create a new experience, and then migrate from the old to the new. Along the way, if you've got questions, just stop me, but I'm going to sort of get into this now in terms of what do I mean by identifying a customer experience, usually one that needs fixing. There's a lot of candidates for this. So to the point I was saying earlier on, given sort of carte blanche, going into an organization, I say, okay, what's your biggest problem? What's the biggest challenge that you're facing in the next 12 months? And as we know, in this world that we're living in now, in the COVID world, there are lots of issues and challenges. You know, businesses simply surviving is a major challenge that many organizations have got. Well, you can use this approach to actually help them. So as it says that it could be experiences with issues, experiences that are mission critical, experiences that are out of control. It's sometimes experiences, so we talked about AI, there might be an initiative in the organization to introduce AI into our critical processes. So we can innovate the process of the project of doing that, for instance. So say we identify an experience, what we want to then do is actually document the current state. Document the current state customer experience, remembering it starts earlier and finishes later than we ever did when we were just looking at it through the process lens, right? So it doesn't require people to have, as it said, qualifications to understand. It's very inclusive. It's not like you have to come out of operations to understand this stuff. It's very inclusive. And interestingly enough, it can be undertaken remotely. So this works really well. And over these last few months, working with some of the organizations I work with, I've had a sort of terrific experience of, say, for instance, I go to Apple, right? When I go to Apple, everybody's got to come to where I am. So to be in the room, so to get 20 people in the room for like 2 days is very expensive, you know, with all the dislocation associated with staying away and travel and hotels and things like that. Not as expensive for me because I'm just me or my team, but you can imagine if they're getting all those people. When you're doing that virtually, of course, as we all know, we can all be sat in our bedrooms, in our kitchens, wherever it is. And once we're running these sessions virtually, the expense of running the sessions is significantly lower. So modeling this innovation approach into the virtual world has been a breath of fresh air. It's allowed organizations to be able to sort of innovate remotely in ways they could never have conceived of 12 months ago. So it can be done remotely. So how do we document? So I'm getting into the practical here. So here you've got on the left-hand side, moments of truth. And you've got a thing we call the POF doc, the points of failure document. Why do we call it a points of failure document? Every single moment of truth is a point of failure. It's a place where things can and do go wrong. So what we do is, this is from the B2B world. So I'm going to show you this example progressively through the next couple of days. But it's in the B2B world, this particular company, they supply pneumatic equipment, pumps, pieces of engines and things for usually people like the John Deeres and the Caterpillars and big farming conglomerates and people like that. So in this instance, the customer needs to order a part, right? Order a product. Customer sends in a forecast orders so that they can predict when they're going to need this stuff. Customer identifies who to call and so on. And you list the moments of truth in that sequence from top to bottom. Okay, so far? Yeah, good. Thanks for the thumbs up. Now, having got that list on the POF doc, and I'll explain those elements of the POF doc in a minute, what we want to do is, acknowledging that the moments of truth are the cause of all work, if we were able to eliminate them, then all the work associated with that moment of truth, both in the interaction with the customer and all the associated internal work that goes into that, all the IT systems, in theory, goes away. Right? So this is about sort of connecting the dots between the moment of truth and its contribution to a successful customer outcome or not. The whole process of doing this is interactive and fun. So let me show you by way of an example what I mean by interactive and fun. So here we are, we've now got our moments of truth. And the next stage is find an action to eliminate. So as it says there, you've got to start with the lowest moment of truth. So it would be the last moment of truth in our context of thinking of, here's the beginning and here's the end, right? So we go to the end point and then we identify an action to eliminate that moment of truth. And you go, oh, right, yeah, we could probably do that. That would eliminate that moment of truth. If we put an action in place, it would eliminate, right? Then we go to the next moment of truth up, and we have to find another action that would eliminate that. So if I've got 20 odd moments of truth across my experience, I'm going to, at the end of it, have 20 odd unique ideas, right? I can't repeat them, and I can't assume that because this action would eliminate 6 other moments of truth that we're going to go with that. Right? You have to find a unique action for every moment of truth. Right? You'll see over there on the right-hand side of the screen, there's some other columns, and we're going to populate those other columns in a minute once we've started to put these actions on. So working bottom up, that's how you do it. So let's give you a real life example. So this goes to North America and Canada in particular, and less so on the East Coast, but certainly on the West Coast of the US and Canada. Sometimes the temperature at ground level can be below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's raining. And when the rain impacts that sort of freezing temperatures, it freezes on impact. And this sort of poor guy isn't going to drive his car to work this morning, is he? The temperature is obviously below 0 and water has accreted on the vehicle. Oh, so what, you might ask? Well, if you are an electricity utility company, it does a horrible thing when you get these ice storms, is it brings down your power lines. And what happens is, so the temperature at ground level can frequently be way below the freezing point, right? But it's raining because the atmosphere, way up there in the clouds is higher than the freezing point. When the rain falls onto a surface, it freezes on impact, and you end up with situations like this where power lines come down. Big problem, particularly in Canada, was a big problem. So how does that manifest itself in terms of a moment of truth with a customer? Well, the power goes off, right? And if it's very cold outside and you're using power for heat and light, you've got a problem. Agreed? So we've said we want to find an action that's going to eliminate the power going off. So we might come up with sort of different ideas here. We might come up with ideas which are to do with, well, what we could do is give every Canadian citizen a generator. So if the grid goes down, the generator switches on. And you go, well, yes, we could, but that would be extremely expensive. Everybody, all 20 odd million people getting a generator for that. Well, we could, another action to eliminate the power going off might be if we buried all the cables below ground, all the electricity transmission lines below ground level, then of course the rain wouldn't freeze on them and they wouldn't fall over. And you go, well, yeah, don't forget Canada's the second largest in terms of geographic size country on the planet, right? You go, oh, right, yeah, it would be expensive. No, it's worse than that. Most of Canada is tundra, so it's frozen. There's permafrost, right, below ground level. You go a few sort of inches down and it's permafrost. And if it's not permafrost, it's very swampy. So practically, putting all the transmission wires below ground level is just not feasible, particularly in Canada. So now you're running out of ideas. So you've come up with 2 logical ones that have either been used or you can see that they're not going to be viable. So we're at this stage, and this is where it gets to be fun. And this guy says, "Oh, I've got an idea," and he's known for telling stories. And we're in the energy company at the time. He said, "No, stay with me. Let me tell you a story." He said, "I go backwoods hunting." So periodically, and it gets to a certain hunting season, so I'll go to the hunting outfitters, Cabela's, and I'll go and get all my gear, and I'll refit the Jeep out. I'll go and buy all my sort of ammunition. I'll go and update my rifles. I'll get my waders and all. And they're going, "John, where's this going?" Go, "No, stay with me. He said, "When I go backwards hunting," he said, "it's happened to me 3 times. This when I go backwards hunting, particularly in springtime, you can get chased by bears, grizzly bears, brown bears, all those sort of things. They'll chase you, and they're going, yeah, get on with it." And he said, "No, the point is that you can't outrun a bear. They're much faster than we are, right? More powerful. What you have to do is you have to climb the tree. But of course, birds can climb trees as well." They go, "Where's this going?" Go, no, stay with me. Birds climb trees as well, but you're a lot lighter than the bird, so you can get higher up the tree. So what does the bird do after he's climbed halfway up the tree and the tree's becoming unstable? what does the burr do to get you out the tree?
I don't know.
It's not a trick question. He shakes the tree, right? So he'll go to drop down to the tree and actually physically shakes the tree. So this guy says, John, he says, so would it be feasible that if we had a forecast of an ice storm from the meteorological office, that we go and tie chunks of meat to all our transmission towers and, you know, the pylons and things, and the birds will come along and try and get the dinner down by shaking the pylon, and in shaking the actual pylon, the rain wouldn't accrete on the wires, it would just fall off before it has a chance to freeze. Bingo. Now, that is actually an action to eliminate a moment of truth. Is it practical to do it that way? No. What we want to do is we want to take that action and implement the effect that we just discussed. So to cut a long story short, what these guys did was they have to go and visit every installation at least once a year. So this wasn't an added expense. They had to do this anyhow. And what they did was install a little black box at the top of the, whether it was a telegraph pole, whether it was a big pylon or whatever, but it's a little black box. And inside the instrumentation of the box was a thermometer, which told you whether it got to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees centigrade, and a humidity indicator, which told you if the humidity got to 100%, what the black box would do is draw power from the actual line it was installed on and gently vibrate. And in doing that vibration, the rain may fall onto the wire, but it drops off before it has a chance to freeze. Okay. In the 5 years since they've implemented that, this particular utility in Canada haven't had a single outage as a consequence of an ice storm, whereas it was every sort of 2 or 3 months during the winter time, you know, over a period of 6 to 7 months. So that simple idea of birds shaking trees, implementing the effect of that. So you've got some other ideas that people will come out with, and they'll seem unrealistic, but it's not that you're going to, in India, a frequent one that pops up is teach elephants to dance. And you go, oh, what's that going to do? And you say, oh, it's entertaining. And you go, yeah, but how do we create that effect? Because we're talking about lots of elephants and lots of dances and stuff. So how do we create that effect of elephants? So how would we entertain the kids, for instance? What could we do? How do we get rid of the moment of truth, which is boredom, potentially? So thinking about assessing the action based on the creation of that effect, we can then go to the next stage and say, okay, what is the value that will be created as a consequence? So that's where we have the right-hand column, whereas it says value created, SCR. Anybody recall what that might stand for? Service cost and revenue. Okay. So we say, for instance, one idea here was we're going to teleport food from store to home. And some, you know, obviously we all know teleportation exists at a quantum level, but not at the atomic level, right? So how could we create that effect? Well, we could get drone delivery, right? Bingo. You know where this one comes from, don't you? We could close down stores, right? So how would we create that effect of closing down? Well, we use centralized warehouses, for instance. So if we close down our stores, right? So what would be the value created if we were able to implement those things? Would it improve service to a customer? Would it reduce our costs? Would it grow our revenues? And is there a plus factor associated with that? And for instance, in Apple, the plus factor used to be brand perception. Would the implementation of this action improve the perception of our brand? So we can then go and check mark or tick, depending on where you are in the world. So a check mark is a positive, a cross is a negative, right? So in this instance, closing down stores, well, actually, that'll be detrimental to customer service. It might reduce our costs, but it's not going to enhance our revenue. In fact, we might see a revenue shortfall because people won't have the same opportunity to shop with us as they would have done before. Plus factor, would that improve brand perception? Probably not. So we can see across a range of these things, and here's an example of the actions to eliminate proposal. Some will be very attractive. We'll be drawn to them. So move call centers to virtual working. I wonder where that one came from. So you can see that was an attractive option. So with that in mind, what we can do is we can identify the ones which give us the biggest bang for the buck in terms of improvement, and then take those ones and say, do they fit together as a solution? And then from that, craft a future state experience. So while I'm telling you this, let me segue off to tell you where this was, where we observed this being used, got permission to codify it and include it in the method, and now it's available to everybody. working with Apple in the early noughties, and they were doing some innovative things. You can probably remember, any of us who are old enough, the iPods and things like that. But they decided around about 2005, and this story has been catalogued in other places now, is they decided they wanted to get into the telecommunications business. Well, why? Well, it's obvious now, but it wasn't so obvious then, because the way phones were working then, they weren't smart. They were, just automated devices. So what Apple did is they took a Nokia N95, which was quite a popular phone back in its day, and good business phone, I thought, using it, and said, let's apply this principle. And they created it, this innovation approach to coming up with a better experience. So if you look at the Nokia N95, and I used to carry one around with me, but eventually it disintegrated because it was like getting so old, it wasn't working anymore. But if we looked at the Apple, if we looked at the Nokia N95 and looked at, say, for instance, I want to phone Eldon this afternoon, right? But I can't remember his number. So I'm going to have to navigate the menu system, go and do a number of key presses, scroll up and down the screen, and then find the number and then press the button to make the call. To do that on the Nokia N95 used to take 9 or 10 moments of truth, 9 or 10 interactions. All right. How would we make those go away? So that was the challenge Apple set themselves. What would be the value created if we did that? And voila, we then had the first iPhone. All right. Bigger screen, designed from the outside in, significantly less expensive to actually produce than the Nokia N95. Now, while Apple were coming up with that innovation by creating this approach, as they were coming up with that innovation, Nokia then said, oh my goodness me, customers are changing, we better go and ask them what they want. And I was part of a survey that Nokia were doing then to sort of say, well, what do you really want? And I was like, well, do with a bigger screen, perhaps bigger keys, right? Perhaps clearer lettering on keys as well. And I'd like a stylus as well, because they're quite popular, so I need a touch screen. Perhaps if you did a clamshell design like the old Motorola phone, so it could fold up and then not take as much space up in my pocket or my bag or my purse or whatever, that would be great. So what did Nokia do, running the biggest voice of customer survey anybody in the world at that point had done, very expensive over a period of like 18 months, they came up with a new device called the Nokia N97. Now, I could spend a day talking about the Nokia N97, but I'm not. Just go and Google it after we finish the call today. What a Frankenstein of a phone that was. It was trying to be all things to all people, and it really didn't achieve a simple objective. Meanwhile, you contrast that with the usability of the iPhone. Which device wins out? What happened to Nokia? Occasionally, they keep trying to make a comeback and so on like that. In 2007, Nokia were the most profitable telecommunications company on the planet. And as we say, the rest is history. So what were Apple doing? Well, they weren't going asking customers what they wanted. They were figuring out what customers needed, right? They were then innovating around that need. So I need to make a call quickly. All right. Pretty straightforward need, isn't it? Okay, so how could we do that? Well, what is the experience of making a call at the moment? Well, with this device, it's pressing all these keys. It's 9 or 10 moments of truth. With the iPhone, it was 3 or 4 moments of truth. So this is where we take this stuff. Any questions so far? Right. Okay, good. I'll carry on. So we then craft. Oops, sorry. Go on.
Not really a question, Steve, but yeah, I suppose I always had the definition of moments of truth being an interaction that has the potential to create a permanent impression in the mind of the customer, as opposed to the way that you define it. So I just find myself, just a comment, I just find myself sort of having to reframe every time. To fall
and
into
it is that it's you can imagine that obviously from my perspective, working with organizations, when we were seeing there's an approach that we teach process people when they're learning this stuff, and it precedes doing innovation. And that was the approach Apple used to use. So I go along that particular year, 2005 it was, I go along that particular year and they say, oh, we've figured out something new. And I'm thinking, ooh, anything new in Apple's got to be worth it. So and I had the great pleasure, unfortunately they weren't my workshops, but I had the great pleasure of meeting Steve Jobs. And I'll just segue off and tell you that story, because there's lots been written about him and all these films and stuff. So back in 2005, one of my colleagues there, is one of our sponsors, said, would you want to come to this workshop? Steve Jobs is going to be in it. It's a new design workshop. So I said, and this isn't under NDA anymore, but it was at the time. So I said, oh yeah, of course I do. And he said, well, you need to understand something, Steve. Steve Jobs is an interesting person. One of the interesting things about him, he has no concept of personal space. So he's just as likely when he meets you as to shake your hand as to give you a hug and give you a lips on lips kiss. So just be aware of that. So I'm thinking, oh, so I'm a bit nervous. I'm a sort of a very sort of conservative English chap, if you want to put it that way. So, this idea that he might sort of enter into my personal space, and I was like a bit nervous. Anyhow, he came along and sort of shook my hand. He introduced at the start of the workshop, and he asked a whole bunch of questions like, so Steve, do you live in the States? Yeah, I do. I live in Texas at the time. Okay, and what's your family? And I said, well, I've got 2 daughters, Katie and sort of Philippa and so on. And you have a little chat about that, and they're teenagers, and that's everything that comes with that. And in fact, my eldest daughter, she's pregnant, and she's due to have a baby in August. You're doing like the chitter chatter stuff and all the rest of it. And he came across really pleasant, really nice, had a fantastic day. And it wasn't like he dominated anything in the workshop. He participated in the same that everybody. And as I say, it wasn't my workshop. It was a design workshop that people were doing back then. So that's the story. A year or so later, and of course, I have a team of people around me. And one of my, I mentioned him before, John Core, who's the Chapter 11 thing. And John, when you see a photograph of him, he's quite a tall chap. He's like nearly 2 meters tall, but he's as thin as a rake, right? So the sponsor says to me, "Oh, do you want to go to another Jobsy workshop?" And you can call him Jobsy internally. So I said, "Yeah, of course I do. But could I bring John? Because John's in town at the moment." They said, "Yeah, but do tell him, about Steve's personal space, and he's a little bit peculiar in the sense of greeting and stuff." So I tell John this. Well, John's Irish, but he's, I suppose, a couple of 100 years ago, he'd been landed gentry from Ireland type of thing. So paint this picture of this tall, willowy guy who's very well dressed, right? And has a presence about him, but nevertheless, he's quite conservative as well. So we're in the line again, getting introduced to the powers that be. Steve Jobs comes to me and he said, "Steve, how are you doing? It's been a few months since I saw you." I said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "How did Katie's birth go?" And it went very well. She had a little boy. He's called Jacob. And are you still in Texas with Southwest? I said, "Yeah, we're still." And I'm thinking, my God, how did he remembered all these like little personal details that you forget yourself sometimes. And I was really impressed. And then he said, I believe you brought a colleague to introduce to me." So I said, "Yeah, this is John. He was the co-founder of the BP group, and he literally, because Steve Jobs was fairly tall, literally walked up to him, put his hands on his cheeks and kissed him mouth to mouth like that." Now you can imagine John Core, my colleague, he just goes, "Oh," he froze, but everybody in the room did a round of applause. It was weird. It was really weird, but John was mortified. And to this day, I don't think he's got over that experience. But what was my learning in association with that? Well, I would have loved to have been able to say that Steve Jobs came to one of my workshops, but he never did. But having met the man and some of the things that were said about him and some of the things that were said in books, and I during in my whole life, I only spent the 2 days with him. But on those occasions, he was gracious. He was participative. There was nothing about him that gave me to believe that he was in some way really weird and horrible with people. He just seemed like, oh, let's figure out the best way to do it. And it was at that time when Apple was saying to me, "We've found a new way to take the work that you've been doing with Virgin and actually push it forward." And they created the Apple Innovation Approach, which is this thing that we're looking at now. All right. So I share that with you because if you ever meet John, and you might do some point in the future, he gets involved in some of the workshops and appears in some of our videos now and again. If you ever sort of get to meet him, just say Steve Jobs. I know, right? Okay. So he probably like, you scare the living daylights out of him. So we let's get back to this. So we create the new experience. So what we're asking ourselves is in terms of these actions, would they hang together in some future customer experience? right? Would they work together? Occasionally when you're doing this, you'll find you'll come up with actions which would not fit together. So to give you an example though, working with a very large online shopping retailer, and one of the ideas was a drone delivery. So that one you saw earlier on, the teleportation, no, we can't do that, but how would we implement it? Well, we could do drone delivery, which gets us part of the way there. There was another one on there, which was arrange for the customer to collect the shopping from the store. Right? Well, those two wouldn't hang together in one experience. They're separate experiences, aren't they? So with that sort of thing in mind, what you could come up with when you're doing this exercise is several future state experiences which suit different needs. That's perfectly valid. So we then sort of say, would these actions go together and from that create the new experience? This is an example of a US automotive, Victoria will know of them, Progressive, who took a process which used to take 20 days to do an auto damage claim, so an insurance claim for a car that's been in an accident, and managed to reduce it down from what was 26 moments of truth down to 4. Right? Imagine all the associated stuff that's going on, and I'll show you how they did that subsequently. Having taken our old experience to a new place, reducing the moments of truth, it would be really nice to know how broken was it before and how much better is it now. So that's where we can then introduce this idea of the disruption factor. Right? It used to be called points of failure factors. So you'll still hear some people, you may come across people in the project work that you're doing who've been trained by us, and they'll sort of say, what's that disruption factor thing? And it used to be called the points of failure factor. But the reason it's a disruption factor is because it says there, if you've got on the bottom axis the number of moments of truth within an experience, and there's more than 13 moments of truth in the experience, you're actually being negatively disruptive to yourself in terms of complexity within our organization. If you've got 12 moments of truth or less, then it's better for our organization, it's better for our customers. So this applies in any type of business, for profit, not for profit. It applies if you're a one-man consulting band or whatever, is we can look at our experiences and assess a before and an after. Bit of the genesis of this was the work that came out of Process Management Institute over in Massachusetts in the States, where the guys at Babson College were getting lots of data from us in terms of the early days of this 15 or so years ago. And we were saying to them, can we have a degree of brokenness calculation? You know, what would that be? You know, how would that work? And they spent 6 months number crunching. And at the end of that, came up with an observation. I think the formula will appear for us. Oh, the formula is not there. I'll show you that one later on then. There's a formulaic approach you can give, which takes the number of moments of truth, takes the number of internal interactions in association with that, and then comes up with a calculation, which is the result of that will be on the left-hand side, called the disruption factor. So you can see there's a number of different elements to the disruption factor. To that point, we were talking about for any process that deserves to exist, there's an optimum number of moments of truth to achieve a desired successful outcome. And theoretically, the optimum number of moments of truth is 1. Right? So you can see that would be in the ideal category. In the real world, it's very rare you actually see that demonstrated, because simply put, our businesses weren't designed with those things in mind. So with inherited ways of working, the ways IT work, different skill sets, different levels of maturity and so on. But this could show us a before and after, and then we can do a calculation to what is the percentage improvement from the before to the afterwards, and then migrate to the new experience. Now, of course, you can go about setting up customer experience management offices and various things like that. What I said to people is you're going to have those mechanisms usually in your organizations anyhow. There'll be some infrastructure there for doing change management. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's integrate the innovation, the 6SI into those environments. So the sooner the new experience is in place, yeah, this is the other thing as well. That people will say, yeah, big change takes a long time. It shouldn't. If you follow the method, and I'll show you later on, is in terms of those actions, 50% of those actions should be implementable in the following month. Recall what I said yesterday as well, was a lot of those actions will be stopping doing dumb stuff. Now, not dumb stuff in an historic context, but dumb stuff in the context of where we are now, third decade of 21st century. So examples, here's some sort of bullet point examples. The US automotive insurer, that is Progressive, as I said, went from 18 days to 48 hours. A large pharmaceutical, that's the Gilead Sciences story, as I said, case studied twice in Bloomberg Business Week. Fast moving retail environment, we can guess who that is. They reduced the delivery time from 2 days to 2 hours. Right. So here in the UK and in Denver, but not up in the Rockies where I live when I'm in Colorado, but in Denver, for instance, from the time of order as an Amazon Prime customer, I can have a delivery within 2 hours now, which was a bit of a problem. I'm prone to having a glass of wine or two late at night, and Penny will go to bed. That's my wife. And I will then do a little bit of cruising, and inevitably I end up on an Amazon website, and I'll order something, and then like 3 a.m. in the morning, the doorbell goes, and it's some Amazon guy delivering something that I just ordered under the influence of a couple of glasses of wine. So I'm actually banned from going on Amazon after 10 p.m. at night now. So you get the idea there. One that I was quite proud of in an hospital nurse's time. So this was at the start of COVID. And we were doing some work with what they call NHS Trust here in the UK. It's one of the large trust hospitals. And probably you don't know is in terms of largest employers on the planet, the National Health Service here in the UK is the 3rd largest employer on the planet. So it would be the 1st largest employer on the planet. Any guesses?
Take a guess and say Amazon. I'm not quite sure.
No. It's the US Army. Right.
Oh, wow.
And who's the 2nd largest employer on the planet? You can go and Google this afterwards and have a read of these numbers. They're alarming, actually. It's the Chinese Army. The 3rd largest employer on the planet is the National Health Service. You know, it's the UK's infrastructure for helping people to get better if they're not well. And we were working with one of the trusts at the start of COVID. So back in February, March time, we were already in there. It wasn't COVID that precipitated us being involved. Our partners were already helping them. And we'd done some surveys about how much time in acute care do nurses actually spend with patients. And as it said there, the alarming number was on average, 40 minutes a day. So in an 8 or 9 hour shift, the nurse was only spending 40 minutes with an acute patient who'd been assigned to them, right? So I nearly said assigned to her, but because the majority of nurses we were working with at the time were female, but that wasn't the sexist thing. So it was 40 minutes a day. By applying the technique and looking at what they were doing and then innovating away the moments of truth, we were able to increase that to 5 or 6 hours. So was that of interest to the hospital to do that? Yeah, there was a greater chance you were going to survive if the nurses were being more attentive to your care. Now, why were the nurses only spending 40 minutes a day? Because they were getting distracted by the admin team to go into these meetings, to go and do these reports, to fill in all these statistics, to go and record what they've been doing and things. And so if you think about a nurse, if you've got a nurse in your family, the vocation there is to help people get better. Well, no wonder they were leaving, the National Health Service, is because they were spending most of the time doing administrative work or listening to briefings or listening to new types of approach and things when they want to be helping people get better. The last one there, for some of our Aussie friends, is based out of Victoria in Australia, and it's one of the people who was coming through this class in March of this year. So COVID beginning to sort of settle in around the world, wasn't it? And what Raj said was, could we apply these principles in a real life situation now? So we worked with him through the next couple of days to take his existing experiences and recraft them. And as he said, one of the experiences we were looking at had 44 moments of truth and reduced it to 8 in a period of 2 or 3 days. And the following week it was implemented. And that was to do with the distribution of money to retailers who were struggling as a consequence of the first lockdown. Right. And it was going to take them over 9 weeks to do it if they'd have followed through on the procedure that they had in place. And they were able to reduce that to 30 minutes using the technique. So it's very powerful and used in many different situations. It doesn't have to be for-profit situations, especially in terms of getting rid of red tape in federal government, Victoria. Opportunity there is amazing.
There's lots of red tape. You're right.
There's lots of red tape, and historically it's the way. And bureaucracy didn't used to be a bad word. When they created the word bureaucracy, it was meant to symbolize this whole idea of being organized into that sort of way of working. But we know it gets in the way these days. So there's an example case study before and after. I've got the example that, yeah, we'll do this one directly. We come back after the break. This is in a B2B world. So I wanted to show you that the more real life examples we can share, the easier it becomes to articulate it into your world. The easier it becomes for you to actually use the technique. Because if you could see how others are managing it and taking something which was, you know, in this instance, something with 28 moments of truth, which was the most critical process / experience that this organization had. They're a Danish company, but the work we were doing with them started off in Iowa, in the States there, a place called Ames, just north of Des Moines. I don't know if you've ever been in that neck of the woods, Victoria, but it's as we say, it's the Corn Belt, it's the Midwest, isn't it? It's the prairies. So we were doing this work with this company that specialize in the delivery of equipment which goes into machinery like John Deere or Caterpillar, those great big sort of road machines. People like Road Tech use the stuff these guys make, and this was the most critical process at the time. And in terms of customer experience, you could see there was a lot of stuff going on in there. So I'm going to pause now just before we take a break and take any questions on 6SI, particularly on innovation. I'll try not to get too sort of segued off into something else, but so any questions at this point, guys? No, we're good. That's fantastic. Thanks for the thumbs up. Appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is we'll take our usual 60-minute break. And when we come back, I'm going to walk you through what this organization did to do the transformation. And then we'll move forward into customer life cycles. But innovation, when I saw this, when I first was witness to it, and then we codified it in this way so that everybody can get access to 6SI now. And we do separate webinars, and occasionally we'll do innovation workshops, and the sort of center of the wheel is this stuff that I've just sort of shared with you. So with that in mind, when we start to think about how can we change things up, how can we move things, then the place I always go to is innovation. Having said that, there's 6 other ways that you can improve any customer experience, depending on how radical you want to be. Now, of course, with this 6SI, you don't have to be as radical as I've just shown you. You don't have to be, as these guys do, is take 28 moments of truth and get it down to 6, right? But you can do. That's what you can do. Sorry, I'm just looking into the chat room, make sure there was no questions in there. So when we come back after our break in 60 minutes, sorry, yes, Victoria.
Oh, quick question. Can you take something at the very micro level and expand it out? Where I'm going with that is, being on the tech side, I ask the customer, kind of what's your biggest pain points? And of course, it's always password resets, for employees to be able to change their passwords.
Yes.
Could you take something like that, even that experience,
absolutely,
and break that? Okay.
It's completely scalable. And I'll give you an example similar to that. There was some work we were doing with what was a call center became a customer experience center. Actually, it was in South Africa as well. And the customer was calling in and they were having to navigate the automated voice response system before they could talk to an agent inside the call center. Now, the automated voice response system is a moment of truth for the customer. But what we wanted to do was to re-engineer the AVRS and make it more fluent, make it easier and more accessible. So though we know the AVRS and an in-process experience is a moment of truth, we needed to drop down into micro moments of truth to figure out what was going on from a technology perspective. So exactly case in point, though, is we operated at the micro moments of truth level and broke it out into its constituent parts. So things like press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for the other, and then the data transports that were happening behind the scenes and so on like that, and applied the principle to it. And the revelation there was we didn't need the automated voice response system in the end. Rather than re-engineering it, we actually got rid of the AVR. So but that's a good example. And exactly like help desk support, infrastructure support, remote support where it's being outsourced. Cabela's in the US, for instance, those people who don't know him, they're a great big outfitting store. So if you're going to become a hunter, that's where you would go to get all your gear. And they originally, using this approach, insourced their call centers, which had been based out in the Philippines, brought them back on shore in the US. distributed them around the States, and eventually actually closed all the call centers down because they realized they didn't need the call centers, and they found actions which eliminated the moments of truth in association with the call centers. So you could be it's completely scalable. You know, we've done this with people like the GAO in the States, with the National Audit Office in the UK, the Audit Office in Australia, and people applying it to compliance and regulation. FDA have done some of this work as well in the US, so it's completely scalable.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question. So we're exactly at the top of the hour where I am in the world now. So let's come back in the room in 60 minutes, if that's okay. And I'll stop the recording so we don't have to sit through a screenshot for 60 minutes. And I'll give you a call 2 or 3 minutes before we start the second session. Okay. Fantastic, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. See you in a little while. Bye.
Thanks. I'll go get coffee.
Yeah, it's a good idea. That's exactly what I'm going to go and do.
All right.
Okay, guys, welcome back. I hope you had a good break. Suitably refreshed and caffeinated again.
Yeah, for sure.
Good, good. So, where were we before the break? We'd introduced this idea of innovation, and based around this concept of the moments of truth, the moments of truth being the cause of all work. So I'm going to give you an example from a B2B space, but it's entirely applicable to the question that was asked just before we broke. Yes, it's completely scalable as well, from the smallest thing to the largest. Bear in mind, one of the discussions we had yesterday was the type of customer. So it's applicable across all types of customer as well. So whether that's primary, secondary, or the internal customer, you can apply this in whatever situation. Where would you see this used a lot in organizations? A very rich, fertile ground on the internal experience sides, where you've got one department delivering a service to another, where you've got, say, projects that are running on behalf of different departments controlled by, say, a PMO or something similar. If you have a look at the project methodologies as well, apply that principle there, where you think the methodology, those are buried moments of truth within that. So working with organizations like PMI to begin to innovate in and around project work so we can bring it up to speed for the third decade of the 21st century. That's also a theme. Where you've got a process/experience, you can innovate it. All right. So there's a couple of webinars I'll point you to in the material about innovating innovation. And that's where we have like sort of seeds which are scattered out in the field where people sort of identify, oh, that's an interesting thing. How could I innovate that? Well, apply the approach, not just in an experience or a process, but say to a product, just in the same way that Apple did in and around the Nokia N95. Imagine reverse engineering through innovation, some of the existing products and approaches. And it probably doesn't surprise you to know that people like Dyson, the UK-based, I would say vacuum manufacturer, they don't make vacuums anymore now, they make whatever their technology is, but innovating around product and service. And we've used this concept extensively in Australia in association with people who are doing design thinking. So how would we innovate design thinking as a practice? How would we innovate agile? How would we innovate even waterfall methodologies within technology to a certain extent? So it lends itself to lots of different spaces. As long as you use the pivotal moment of truth idea, that's the cause of all work. You won't go too far wrong. So I'm going to show you that in, as I said, with the B2B. But just before we do that, I mentioned John Core. I mentioned him a couple of times. There's me on the left. That's John on the right. This was after we'd spent, this is a few years ago, just after we'd spent some time with the UK government in number 10 Downing Street, talking about some of their approaches within sort of local and central government and how those approaches could be significantly improved using the innovation approach. And one of our colleagues, who's actually a UK ambassador, I won't say for which country now, but he's a UK ambassador, he's actually taken some of the diplomatic protocols and applied innovation to those. So you can imagine things happen a lot more quickly than they used to do. So any questions before I sort of dive into this B2B example?
Nope, I'm good.
Good, good, fantastic, good. And as I said, if one or two of you are doing as well, is if you want to have a chat offline later, that's great. We can get a slot in the diary, or we can do it after we've done a session. I've just posted something James Dawkins has done this morning, which I think has gone into CX Cop as well, the community of practice. But I've also posted it in the Masters area on WhatsApp. So you recall yesterday with today's invite, I put the WhatsApp invite to come and join the Masters, and if you get a chance, just introduce yourself, say you know who you are and what you're doing and that sort of a thing. And then the people who are in the Masters group will embrace you, and you'll be able to discuss all these wonderful things that we're doing over the next 2 or 3 days in the context of how other people are finding it. What are they doing, and so on. So take advantage of those communities. There's also on LinkedIn, there's a Masters group that I'll invite you to if you're not already in there. Again, that's a space where you can talk with your peers and colleagues who've been through this experience that you're doing now. So let's put our minds in this place. So let's take you to this Danish company who in this instance are based in a place called Iowa, which is in the Midwest of the US. A lot of farming goes on there. It's in prairies, and there's manufacturers that work with an association with those big conglomerates who are in sort of industrial sized farming, if you like, but also making equipment for people who build highways and roadways and infrastructure and things like that. So a fairly classic B2B with extended supply chains, lots of partners involved, and customers ranging in size. When we did the customer categorization exercise with these guys, we identified 18 primary customers. So the techniques we used yesterday, the successful customer outcome canvas and the outside in strategic matrix, we use those two across all 18 of those primary customers, and figured out if there were common needs, and then again regroup them, categorizing them by need rather than are they a big partner or a small partner. Are they based in that state or that country? Though that demographic data was significantly less useful than looking at needs-based psychographic data. So we started off with 28, and just as we've seen earlier on, creating the POF doc. So those are the moments of truth, numbers 1 to 28, and then the actions to eliminate. Recall when we said actions to eliminate, you might come up with some wacky ideas. It's not the wacky idea you'll necessarily implement, it's the effect of the wacky idea. So birds shaking trees converts to a little electronic device which sits on the coupled with the wiring of the transmission cables, and then vibrates if the temperature drops below 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity increases to 100%. It's either foggy or it's raining, and the device vibrates. The ice doesn't accrete. Therefore, you've eliminated the moment of truth of the power going off as a result of ice storms forever, just like that. So just if you imagine having to repair all that infrastructure, the lack of service while you're repairing the infrastructure, the extra costs associated with all that redistribution of resources and things. So I don't need to say much more. So here we are, we've listed it out. On the value created column, you'll see they've got service cost and revenue, and N and A, and N and A are the plus factors in this instance. So does N in this instance meet a need? And A, is it achievable? And achievable, low achievability, medium achievability, high achievability. And does it meet a need? Well, of course, there should be none of these which say no, because we've also done the successful customer outcome canvas and identified in association with that particular, the customers are experiencing this experience, is this aligned with meeting their needs? So that you might sort of say, well, if it's 100%, then why have we got a column? You could have had another column. Doing this as well is a learning experience. And I know Victoria will get with this, and having been in technology, and Eldon probably as well, is a lot of the methodologies we've got are very sequential. So I recall I talked yesterday about this method we used to use before CEM method, which was called 8 Omega: discovery, analysis, design, validate, integrate, implement, control, and improve. Right, so 8 stages. And after we'd done discovery, we moved into analysis. We never went back to discovery again. After we'd done analysis and we moved into design, we never went back to analysis again, because in technology terms, that's scope creep. And if technology is expensive, as it used to be, then you don't want to go back, because you'll scope creep will actually blow the budgets out of the water. But accepting technology, that going back and revisiting our assumptions, what do we call that in real life? We call that learning. So within the CEM method, we're allowed to learn. But as Google say, just make sure you don't learn things more than twice, right? And that's that whole idea of fail fast. Let's experiment, let's innovate, and innovation lends itself to that. So as you're doing innovation itself, you may begin to innovate the way you want to do it and the way you want to relate it in organizations. To that point, that are you working at a micro moments of truth level, an in-process experience moments of truth level, or the macro level? Give you an example of macro moments of truth. Doing some work with an American bank a few years ago, and we were looking at the ideal home loan process. And so we got all the constituents in the room. So we had about 20 people. And on this particular day, I don't know, I must have been weaving a magic spell. We convinced the CEO and his minions to come along. There was a chap called John Reed, the CEO. So we had those guys in the room, and we were doing the moments of truth exercise, just as, you know, like these guys identified 28. We've got everybody in the room doing the same thing around home loan application processes. And so if you could envisage, everybody's got their heads down and they're filling in these post-it notes. So we go around the room after 10 minutes and, you know, Dave, how many of you got? Oh, I've got 23. Julie, how many of you got? Oh, I've got 16. Andrew, how many of you got? Oh, I've got 24. And then we're getting ready to normalize. But as we went around the room, bear in mind there's 20 of them, there's John Reed and his minions. We got to the CEO, John Reed, and said, Mr. Reed, how many of you got? And he said, oh, goodness me, I don't know why you guys make work seem so complicated. I've got 3. And we only do 3 things as a bank. We get money in, we move it around, and we give it out. Now, those are what, as funny as that is, and as abstract as that is, that probably explains, you know, and we said, no, there's many more of that. He said, look, I'm the CEO because I understand this stuff. Obviously, you guys are mired in complexity and red tape, right? But the whole point was, those are the 3 macro moments of truth in the context of the home loan process. So macro, in-process customer experience. 95% of the work you're going to do with this stuff will be in process customer experience, but occasionally you will have to dip down, just as we were talking about the example, where you need to get into micros and micro moments of truth. And the example I used was, it's okay to call in process moments of truth, customer navigates automated voice response system. But if I'm in technology and I'm needing to redesign that or reconfigure it in some way, or better understand the data transports and things like that, I need to drop down into the micro moments of truth level. All right. So there we are. We've got our 28 moments of truth. So they identify the value created by implementing of that action to eliminate, then identify the ones which give us the biggest bang for the buck. So that's 6, 12, 16, and 28 moments of truth. And then ask ourselves the question, could we put those ideas together in the context of a future experience? Would they actually hang together? And so you have to look at them. We'll use customer facilities as distribution warehouses. Eliminate a rush surcharge. What was that? We're going to explore rules in a little while, but one of the strange rules that this organization had was instead of it taking normally 6 weeks to get a part, the customer could request a rush part delivery, as long as they would pay the cost of transportation, you know, by air freight or something like that. So rather than going over road, they're going to pay via air freight. And you would think that instead of it taking 6 weeks, if you could do that in terms of actually creating the part, it could be as little as a week. When we looked at it, the actual process in and around customer rush, as it was called, was 5 weeks. So you only actually saved a week. So we were curious about this. And as we dug deeper, we found some business rules in there which were implemented some like in the last recession, when even though the customer's going to pay for it, it of course has to come out of somebody's budget first. So I'm going to pay shipping. So I'm going to get FedEx to ship it. Okay. So I pay for that and then I can recover the cost from a customer. Well, during the last recession, rather than hemorrhaging costs, they put all sorts of checks and balances and controls in and needed multiple sign-offs for anything like this. If you're going to pay money out of your budget, you need to get like 4 sign-offs, and it would take like 2 or 3 weeks to get that sign-off. Well, somebody forgot about the rule, didn't they? As things picked up, they kept the rule in place. So the customer would pay a rush surcharge, but they'd only get it like a week faster than they would have done if they hadn't have paid the rush surcharge. So the elimination of that moment of truth, paying the rush surcharge, That's going to be a win as well. And you might put that back in place later on, but this whole issue to do with let's penalise the customer because we have a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, which was put in place for the right reasons at the time, but then the rule was forgotten about and just carried on existing until we got to a situation like this where we needed to innovate to compete better. Accept purchase order at time of need, an Amazon model, as it says, number 16, and then number 28, a vendor managed inventory. So the consequence of that was bringing those 4 ideas together in and around a new experience, produced 6 moments of truth. Now, I've already related this idea of innovating innovation. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at these 6 moments of truth, which is significantly less than 28, notice number 5 and 6, customer receives invoice, customer sends payment. We realized very quickly that when we went live with this, if we were building a bond of trust with our customers, and you'll see the business these guys are in, the industry they're in, you might sort of say is hydraulics, but the business they're actually in is confidence. So if they want confidence across the whole supply chain, across all their partners and customers, then that implies we're going to have to start trusting each other, whereas in the past we may not have done so. Right? We may not have relied on your word because evidence suggested otherwise. But if we're going to build that confidence, then we have to build trust. So we looked at moments of truth number 5 and 6 and said, hang on a minute, if the customer's drawing down the product, so we can see the stock change and we know they've drawn the product down, could we have an agreement with them that as soon as the product's drawn down, we can debit from their bank account the cost of that product? In which case they wouldn't have to actually send us the payment. And in fact, we wouldn't have to do the invoicing in the way it's done now. We'll still have to have some, electronic type mechanism, but moments of truth 5 and 6 could be merged, and in doing that, you've eliminated another moment of truth. So innovation never stops. Innovation becomes the constant. And that's I'll show you when we get to dashboarding on the 4th day. We do that at a personal level as well as a team and organizational level when we're implementing this stuff. So 6 moments of truth. We're thinking about that creation of a new experience. And then what we would want to do is establish what was the disruption factor. So this time I've remembered to put the formula there for you. So you can see on the top left of the graph, it's take the number of moments of truth, multiply that by moments of truth minus 1, divide the answer by 2, and then add handovers, which I'll talk to you about tomorrow. But handovers are internal interactions. They're any interaction that we're doing in the organization that doesn't directly involve the customer. Now, when we're doing innovation, we haven't dropped down to that level to understanding current state, what are the internal interactions. But we know from the research that the PMI have done for us over the years, and we were sending them lots and lots of data of people like yourselves who were doing this work, stripping out the names to protect the guilty parties. But nevertheless, they were able to, from the patterns of that information, was discern certain relationships between the number of moments of truth, the interactions with customers, and the number of internal interactions, the interactions amongst ourselves while we're actually doing the work. What is the relationship between moments of truth and handovers? Right. Interestingly enough, we felt that if you're say you're in fast-moving retail fashion, you would have a different relationship between your moments of truth and the internal interactions that are necessary to support that. Contrast, fast-moving retail with pharmaceutical, for instance, and you sort of think that the ratios would be different, but it proved not to be the case. Doesn't matter what you're doing. If you say, for instance, have a experience which has at least 10 moments of truth, you will typically find there are 3 or 4 handovers for every moment of truth. So in a moment of truth, if say I've got 10, I would expect there to be 30 to 40 handovers, 30 or 40 internal interactions that we're having to do to support the moment of truth. So this goes to that point. If I'm able to eliminate a moment of truth, all that internal work goes away as well. So recall the Swedish hydroelectric company going down from 21 chunks of IT down to 4, and then integrating that with SAP. So all of a sudden SAP become heroes on the block, because instead of the massive complexity of those big integration exercises with all the data management and consolidation, it now becomes much more straightforward to integrate with 4 line of business systems. So we can plot using the graph, were we, so up there at 28 moments of truth, if you scan across, that's over, in terms of the disruption factor, just less than 500. To where did we get to, down to 6? So we've moved it into an ideal status now. And then sort of later on, we'll look at the percentage improvement on that. Remembering that just step back to the graph for a minute. Remembering that if you turn that into a percentage improvement, that percentage directly relates to the cost of this experience, the cost of running this experience, and the service that we're providing as a consequence. So we can see down at 6, yeah, that's hugely disruptive to their competitors, but more importantly, it delivers success for the customer much more quickly. So what used to take 6 weeks now takes 2 days, right? And there's improvements that we can do to that, which are underway at the moment. So as I said, innovation is a gift that keeps on giving. Innovation becomes the constant. Any questions on this so far? Are we good?
I do, just on the previous slide,
Yeah.
Steve, please.
Okay,
so you said earlier, innovation can be done quickly. I guess that's the message you gave.
In an afternoon, literally in an afternoon.
Yeah,
morning.
So when you go from 28 MOTs down to 6,
yep.
Is it typically to reuse and repackage capabilities that exist, or is this blue sky and also still able to innovate within an afternoon and deliver very quickly to customers?
Right, well, let's take this as a real live example then. So number 1 is the same. Moment of truth number 1 existed in the current state as it does in the future state. So there's a need arises, so the customer becomes aware of a need, however that. The new things there is this idea of an on-site supermarket, moment of truth number 2. And what that was just in the same way that we can shop on Amazon. Why don't we have our parts catalog in this instance operating in the same way that Amazon does and make everything operate through the portal, right? So in this instance, moments of truth 2 and 3 were new moments of truth that didn't exist before, that were not a repackaging of existing moments of truth. So we had to create that. And interestingly enough, they're now in the process of saying innovation carries on. They're now in the process of integrating moments of truth 2 and 3. So this overall moments of truth of 6 has now going down to 4. And if you think of 2 and 3, how would you eliminate those moments of truth? Customer walks to on-site supermarket. What's this walk into an on-site supermarket? Well, it's because it's in the central system. Well, can we not distribute them through apps? Well, yeah, we could do that. In which case, you've eliminated the walk, and the customer picks the part. Open the app, pick the part. Job done. So those were new capabilities that were required. So that required us to actually develop the apps in the first instance, and that was literally, it was like a 3-day project to do that. Customer notifies X of pick part, and traditionally that would have been a physical notification that we've removed a part from the store, right? And occasionally you might do, in the old world, you might have done a stock check to find out, are you running low on parts? Of course, this is now all electronic. It automatically debits the stock level if the customer removes a part from stock. And the stock, if you recall on some of the suggestions on the previous slide where we were looking at centralized warehouses or put the stock in the customer's premises. So rather than having centralized locations from which the stock is distributed, this is how Amazon do it, for instance, is they buy facilities from other people where they will temporarily house Amazon stock. So particularly at like Christmas time, or as we go into Thanksgiving and then Black Friday and things like that in the States, Amazon will buy storage facilities in other locations which are close to the customer, which allows them to do that, rapid delivery, 2 to 6 hours type of thing. So the customer notifying X of pick part was a moment of truth, which was a system-to-system moment of truth. I think I mentioned yesterday, there's 6 different types of moments of truth. And then 5 and 6, customer doesn't receive an invoice anymore now. It's an automatic debit from the bank account as an acknowledgement that the part has been received. So to answer your question there, Alden, the new things that were required to actually implement this were the creation of an app, and then to a certain extent, a retraining of the customer so that they're going to do things in a different way, right? And we'll talk when we get into, I don't know, it's later on tomorrow, into day 4, the digital capability. Now we attach that when we're doing this sort of redesign. So how long did it take them to implement? It took them a month. So from having the current state to the future state, right? and freed up a massive amount of resource in association with those 28 previous moments of truth. All those
Can I ask
duplications.
a quick?
Please
Can I
do,
ask
yeah.
a quick question? So, from the many moments of truth to the 6 or 4 moments of truth that you
Yep.
mentioned, what's the key question that you ask the delegates to start looking for, or is it really okay? What can we do without?
Well, no, it isn't that. That would be what I would say is, right, if we take traditional processes approaches, and bearing in mind, I used to train process modeling as well, and ARIS and those sort of toolkits, is we'd always start with a current state, and then we'd look at some, I'll sort of be bland about this, but we'd identify problems with the current state. Then we'd identify opportunities to actually improve current state. And then we move to future state. We'd come up with an idea that we could do an incremental change or a radical change. And it's almost as if we'd all go into meditation and think about what ideas have we going to come up with? No, the golden thread that links all this stuff together is this table on the screen at the moment, this POF doc, which says that how we get from where we are to where we're going to get to is by eliminating moments of truth. And so the task in hand, even if it's a fantastic moment of truth, if I can find an action which would eliminate it, then that's what we do.
Yeah.
So whether it's a process an experience we've just created, or it's a long time bureaucratic nightmare, we can apply this principle to it. So when I talk to people about we've got to get more scientific about customer experience, what I'm talking about is so often in customer experience, we'll meet people as if, and I do meditation, of course, but as if we have to go into a meditation to wait for some bright, sparky ideas. No, we can engineer the ideas by, in this instance, saying, okay, how would I eliminate, let's go step back to have a look at moment of truth number 6, customer contacts X for lead time. So customer contacts us to find out what the lead time is. Well, what's the action to eliminate that? If you look at moment of truth number 6 on there, so if we're over here and we're looking at moment of truth number 6, I eliminate that customer contacting us to find out what the lead time is, use customer facilities as distribution warehouses. Well, if we're already using your facilities, you've got the part on site already. All right, it might be in a gated area, which is, it says this belongs to X, but you've already got access to the part. If it's not with you, you can see from the portal, who is it with? Where is that part? Oh, it's 5 miles away. Whereas before it might have been 500 miles away. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? So
yes,
how
it
do
does.
we, yeah, what is the stepping stone? So it's not that sort of, when we were doing re-engineering, we used to start with a blank sheet of paper. And Michael Hammer said this towards the end of his life. A reason why a lot of re-engineering projects would fail is because we'd create a picture of the future without truly understanding why the present is like it is. I was fortunate in the re-engineering projects I was involved with, and that was my first book, as I say, in 1993, Re-Engineering: A Senior Executive's Guide, where we chronicled the story of re-engineering the European banking operation of an American bank. And we followed the letter of the law, and it seemed to work swimmingly well. Well, did we have people in the team? We had people in the team who had expertise, but apparently other people were failing because they would create this abstract of the future, do the plan to cross the bridge to get to it, but they wouldn't understand that in the future state that they were creating, it didn't acknowledge some of the issues in the past, and those issues would recur in the future state. So re-engineering would, what's that? That in theory is great, but in practice theory doesn't work. And so people were being very theoretical with that application. It wasn't being as successful as it could have been. So we don't have to start with this blank sheet of paper. We're connected with this, what I refer to as a golden thread, from our current state right the way through to the implementation of the future state. And we can audit each stage. We didn't sort of say, well, what did you do in this workshop? Well, we had brainstorming for an hour and we came up with 27 different ideas and then evaluate it. No, you're not need to do that. You can if you want to, it's fun, but you don't need to. What you can do is you can say, look, the task in hand, whether you think you want to or not, is how do I eliminate this moment of truth? How would I get rid of it forever? Right? I'm coming up with, some weird and wacky things. Often teleportation crops up a lot in supply chain businesses, but how would you implement it? Well, let's use drones, and as Amazon will tell you, and there's some videos to have a look at later, what they will say is that in terms of the B2C business, something like 96% of all goods that we get delivered to us can be brought to us via drone. So then it's a question of, well, how do we execute on that plan? Just another wrinkle on this, and I mentioned it yesterday, but we call them OI dashes, these things where we do 5 days. Day 1 and day 2, meet the generals and the troops and understand the lay of the land. Day 3 and 4 are the actual workshop session, where day 3 is the current state and day 4 is the future state. And then day 5 is the action planning and the sign off. So I'll show you that when we get to talking about the customer experience management office concept on day 4. But the point of that is that there's nothing that you're doing in there which isn't connected, and everything's validated. Now, when you get to the action plan on day 5, and it's usually a consolidation of a range of action plans. So we normalize it and then we come up with the action plan. I've already mentioned 50% of the actions will be implementable in the following month. But just imagine exactly as you were with this organization, going from 28 moments of truth down to 6. What are some of the main actions that I'm going to be implementing? What are going to be some of the main things I'm going to be doing? So when we move from this down to 6, most of these have gone away. So what we're going to do, we're going to stop doing them. So a lot of the actions are stop doing that. And there's a little process associated with that, of course. Is like we had one situation with an insurance company who was storing files off-site. And we said, why are you storing them off-site? And it was a business rule. And anyway, we changed it. But in the end, they didn't need to store the files at all. They were able to send the files straight out, in which case we eliminated the need for storage. But one of the bugbears of that was, what about the delivery drivers who are taking all these files, taking them to the store and bringing them back again? What are we going to do with that? Well, from Monday, can we agree we're going to redeploy them to more meaningful things? Yeah, but we have to get the unions involved in that. Okay, let's get the unions in the room now. Let's have a discussion with them. If we can deploy these guys to more meaningful things, then isn't that a worthy thing to do? Yeah, but we could let them go and then save a significant cost. And you go, well, you could, but then do you think when you come to do the next stage of the review, you're going to win hearts and minds? What you probably want to do is do what most of us would complain about is smart resource is scarce. And here we have people who understand our organization and our culture and our style, and we can evolve that thinking. So exactly to the point that we talk about in our, says Eagle, grabbing it from the calendar, in our DIR book, is 97% of the people who were there when we started this project are still there now. You know, they are the change, you know, the people who are doing the change. And you go, yeah, but we hired them from school with no qualifications and no exams. And you go, what are you trying to say? That they're stupid or something? No, most of us are not. And most of us, given the opportunity, would want to do something more meaningful. So to that point about the implementation of it is, guys, these are the things we're going to stop doing next week. And in doing that, you immediately save cost and improve service. So we go to the future state. I don't know if that answers your question there, Eldon, in terms of the linkage between current state and future state. Yeah, good. So from that point of view, we can then, what was the disruption factor before? We were in a state of chaos, and now we're in a state of ideal. Right, so that's a good place to be. And as we've said, you can carry on innovating innovation. You can carry on doing that. So that's the 6 SI. There's a couple of webinars I'll point you at that I walk through this again. And if you're introducing this as a subject matter and you feel like, oh, I'm not as confident as I want to be with this shit, just get me doing the webinar. You know, just play the webinar to people, and it shows them a couple of different examples, but it walks people through the doing of this. Okay, so what I want to introduce now is the idea that every experience has a life cycle associated with it. And yes, in journey mapping, we do this as well, but I want to get a little bit more scientific than you know, the pretty pictures. I want to actually understand. I want to be able to use life cycle thinking in and around experience to know whether I've embraced all of the experience or whether I've just embraced a chunk of it. So with this idea of the sort of restructuring, there's a couple of if you come back and do the champions, and primarily we're discussing the not so much new tools and techniques, But how do we do this on an enterprise-wide level simultaneously with all our customers and all their experiences, right? So when we're talking about that, of course, that's a large exercise, but what supports those sort of exercises is a maturities model. And the maturities model has two perspectives. One is the environment we're in, right? And the other are the actual experiences themselves. And so we look at the maturity of those across the environment and the experience. So when we're talking about Abacus, I'm going to introduce it now, the CX life cycle, this is looking specifically at the experiences / processes themselves, not necessarily the ecosystem, which we have a different way of measuring. So Abacus, what do we mean by that? Well, what Abacus stands for is awareness, buying, acquisition, customization, use, and share. Right. So that's the original Abacus, which had 6 elements to it. Google have latterly introduced the awareness of the awareness and after share repeat. Right. So it's now got 8 elements, if you want to think about that. The 8 elements will be firmly CM methods, just moving from version 12 to 13. So in version 13, we will always talk about the 8 elements, not just the 6, which is what it originally was a few years ago. We're asking ourselves the question, across these elements, where do the moments of truth occur in association with the life cycle? Right. So Abacus, because it looks like an abacus, of course. Right. So there's a, I'm not going to read, don't worry about this. I'm not going to read you this. This is for reading offline later. But for instance, let's take the second one, the blue one, the I want to go, right? The I want to go moment happens when you learn more about the product, you convince yourself it's worth buying, okay? All you need to do now is find a place that sells this. In this case, we use an example, which was shoes, right? So when you're building these out, what you're trying to do is understand, where does the awareness occur? Where does the buying? Where does the acquisition? Where's the customization or personalization, if you want to do Abacus? And where is the usage and where is the share? Now let's go back to our airline example the other day. And you think about the example used, which was BA. Their process was ticket to carousel. Well, both ticket and carousel probably fit in the usage part of Abacus, but you've nothing upstream and downstream of it. Whereas the real customer experience starts when the need arises. So there's an awareness there. And it isn't over until we've actually delivered against the need. And at which point we might want to share that with friends and family and so on like that and tell people what a wonderful service it was. Right. And then, of course, Google would say, yeah, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat type of thing. So it's got, as you can see, grayed out 2020 there. This is very new stuff. So if you meet somebody who's done this program, before 2020, they'll just know Abacus as the 6 elements and not the 8. If you're thinking about it as those 6 elements, and I'm going to show you an example now rather than just the theory of it. How does the customer actually become aware? So let's use an abstract example. Say I want to buy a new car. So when did I become aware that I wanted to buy a new car? Where was that moment of truth? Well, it was the realization that the car I've got is getting a few years old now and it's got a lot of miles on the clock. So I think I desire a new car. Okay, well, what's this buying thing then? Right. Well, the buying thing is, well, what sort of model am I going to have? Do I want a high-end luxury car, or do I want a runabout, family runabout, just to do the shopping and that sort of thing? Do I want a city car or a big car? Right. Okay. I think I like the look of BMWs, and I think I'll probably go for one of those hybrids because we're all moving from, UK government have just made an announcement that all petrol car sales will be banned from 2030. So they brought it forward 10 years, for instance, now. So that's beginning to inform our thinking, because if you're one of those sort of people who likes to hang on to cars for a long period of time, you might want to sort of think about, well, if I go for a hybrid, I'm a stepping stone to going all electric, aren't I? Perhaps, until there's an infrastructure there. I don't want to go all electric. So I'm now buying into the sort of product that I want, the service that I want. I'm starting to think about the color, the degree of fit with my needs and so on like that. Acquisition is, as it says, is the actual purchase, right? And that could be done in a whole bunch of different ways, of course. Customization, so how much is this product personalized to my needs? So is it customized to my needs specifically, or is it generic for a whole bunch of different needs? So recall we said that BMW have 24 categories of primary customer. Some of those needs overlap, as we discussed yesterday, the dog and the child need, for instance. So how does that all hang together? How does that fit? And then use, how do we drive the car? How is it serviced? What's the maintenance schedule and things like that? And then share. Usually we see that, don't we, where people say, yeah, share this on Facebook or Twitter, but that's very static. How could we make share much more proactive? How could we encourage that? How could we gamify sharing of this fantastic service, this fantastic experience that I've had? So with those things in mind, what we can do is we can lay out the structure, as it says there, abacus again, and looks like swim lanes, doesn't it? So we could, what is the current customer experience? Now, bear in mind, as we've already said, customer experiences have always existed. This isn't something new that somebody's invented. Customer experience has always been there. It just didn't matter so much until we got in the 21st century, where businesses realized, hang on a minute, our starting and end point are too narrow. We need to redefine that. We need to embrace the actual experience we've created, knowingly or not, right? We need to embrace that. So within our current customer experience, I'm still having a need to fly, even if British Airways don't recognize that as a need. Southwest certainly do, and Emirates certainly do, and Singapore certainly do, when we think of those airlines. And then we can map to that the current state experience, and then having engineered it through innovation, is we can then sort of take that current state and say, okay, what's the emergent future state? So we'd run the 6SI against that current state. Right? We do that elimination. We come up with our 6 moments of truth in the example we talked about. Right? Having identified where and what they are, we then map them against abacus. So you can see in this instance, those 6 moments of truth fall into those elements. There's a couple of videos in the deck when you get to it later, and one of those is actually of an Emirates commercial. And in that commercial, they talk to 5 of the 6 elements within abacus. Right? There's only one element that they haven't included in that, and they couldn't. It's the actual purchase of the ticket to fly, right? But they have 5. They have the other 5 elements. Recall we've said that for any process that deserves to exist, there's an optimum number of moments of truth to achieve a desired successful outcome. For the guys we were talking about in the case study, it was initially 6, and it's gone down to 4. But theoretically, what did we say was the ideal? 1. So if I just have 1 moment of truth, what elements of abacus would be embodied within that 1 moment of truth? All of them. So we'd have full abacus in 1 moment of truth. Now, they are few and far between, but the Prime button in Amazon is a good case in point of a sub-process, the actual, purchase process, containing all the elements in that 1 button, that 1 moment of truth. Is that making sense? Good, good. Silence is golden. Okay. So this is the abacus. So if we're thinking about upstream and downstream, of course, you can add on where does the awareness of the awareness occur? So you probably have a column to do that as well. And then latterly after share, how can we encourage more and more customers to repeat? Where that manifests itself is in companies like Zappos in Las Vegas. They're the world's most profitable online shoe retailer. Right. So they sell other stuff as well now. They sell other items of clothing and things, but they are the world's most profitable online shoe retailer. And what Tony Shea, who's just in the process of leaving Zappos, the CEO, talks about is they've effectively scrapped their call centers, right, and redistributed the people who would have been in the call centers into the sort of mainstream business. And they have a way of organizing themselves that we'll talk about in due course, but not so much today. And what he says was, call centers, yeah, great, you could have scripts and people could tell you about products and service, but to build an affinity with our customers, we actually want to have conversations. We don't want to put them through an automated voice response system, press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for that. We actually want to have a conversation. Now, initially, your reaction to that might be, if you come from a functional specialist silo world, the industrial age world is, well, it's more expensive to have a person dealing with a call than, a piece of automation. And that is true, right? So if I'm in charge of operations and those are my budgets, I want to get the cost of my calls down in my call center. Yeah. But this is another example of an output that's not aligned with a successful customer outcome. What is the outcome of driving out costs for calls? Well, it's sometimes a compromised customer experience. How many times how many hours have you spent waiting in queues and lines, sat in the switchboard and telling you, your call is really important to us. You're number 24 in the queue. And hey, by the way, do you know you can access this service through the web? And you're thinking to yourself, have you tried accessing your own service through the web? Those designs were predicated on this idea we're trying to drive out costs of process. But that's old school, that's inside out, right? What we want to do is be outside in. And it's beneficial to actually, in Zappos context, to have a one-to-one call with customers, which yes, is more expensive, but the overall effect of that, customers buy significantly more and the rest of our costs of operations have decreased. We've won the Triple Crown. Because Tony Hsieh says 70% of their business is repeat business. So 70% of the revenue coming into their business is from repeat customers. And you don't build an affinity in their sort of business. They say they're in the business of feeling good, right? So the industry they're in is online shoe retailing. The business they're really in is feeling good. So is everything we're doing contributing to our customers feeling good? So immediately you see that. You see a whole bunch of moments of truth, which are the automated voice response system, press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for the other. And as a salesperson, I can demonstrate how much less expensive your calls are. And if I'm appealing to somebody who owns the budget for that, that's pretty enticing. But that's the old way. We don't want to be doing it like that anymore, right? We need to build an argument which says that that's not sufficient in a customer-centric world. So any questions on that?
Hey,
Victoria,
Steve,
please.
Yeah. Hey, to your example, so one of the things that they did was implement an automated password reset system. But when we went back and looked at the data, customers were still calling to get their password reset. So we said, wait a minute, our ticket volume is not going down. It's actually increasing now that we've implemented this tool. So we started looking and figuring it out. And basically, it's the process that they use for customers to reset it themselves was so difficult that they said, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to call somebody.
Yeah. And of course, if you've got technical people doing things like help desk services, then naturally the best solution is one that's a technical one, because that uses your skills and the fact you might have a brain the size of a planet doing IT and things like that. But we have to think about the lowest common denominator, don't we?
Right.
And in my world, I don't know about you guys, but in my world, my mother's 83 now, and she's got like 3 phones. Why she needs 3 phones, I don't know. But if you call her, she never has the right phone with her. When you do call her on WhatsApp, she swears blind you never called her. It's like, oh my goodness me. And so I outsourced technology support to a good friend of mine that lives close to where my mother lives. And here in the UK, it's about 250 kilometers away. But when I'm in Colorado, there's not a hope in hell's chance, because I can't get her to point it at the screen to show me what she's looking at on Netflix, for instance. Your phone's upside down, Mum, turn the phone round, So we have to work with, in any organization, with our lowest common denominator. That's what I always say. So if somebody can break it, they will. So all our user acceptance testing is built around those sort of principles. Is like, we're going to try and really break this. And clearly, the less moments of truth you've got involved in any activity, it's more difficult to break it. Does that make sense?
Right.
So it's if we can eliminate these moments of truth, and it causes you to get really creative with it, is how could we make that a better process? There's a similar thing that happened, not so much in the IT world, and my Australian friends will know this, is Qantas decided they wanted to automate the check-in process. So if you've been to Australia, I apologize if you've been a victim of this, which I have. And so what they did is they looked at the check-in process, right? And then set about, well, let's automate it. Well, if you automate a mess, what do you end up with? An automated mess. Again, it's not rocket science. And what they did things like, we need smart smart baggage package, smart baggage tagging, right? So yeah, we can use barcodes and stuff like that, but it'd be really neat if we did RFID and all that sort of stuff. So they started coming up with tags for that. We also want the customers to do their own tagging. So let's install ticketing machines out in the foyer rather than it being you have to go to a counter and then deal with somebody. So they installed all these ticketing machines, all right? And the ticketing machine would give you the ticket once you've scanned your ticket to travel and passport or whatever your ID you've, would give you the ticket, and then you have to attach the bag tags to the bag, right? Having done that, you then have to transport the bag itself to the weigh machine, which is also the conveyor belt. So you put this thing on the weigh machine, right? And the glass screen, perspex screen comes down, right? So you can't get back at your bag now. And it tells you the weight. And it tells you if you have to pay some more, if it's overweight and stuff. It all sounds swimmingly well. And what would look really smart in terms of a flow chart and a diagram and an explanation, look wonderful. Exactly the same problem. Customers were finding this whole ticketing thing really awkward and difficult. So what did they have to do? They had to recruit the person who used to do the check-in, and they needed more people now because they've got more ticketing machines. So for every ticketing machine, they had to have somebody stood there helping you put the tags on the bags, right? As we know, some people are not very strong, and especially little old ladies, right? So they had to have the people would come along and pick the bag up for you from the ticketing machine and transport it over to the weighing machine, right? They then had to have somebody at the weighing machine who would override the perspex screen coming down, because if you found your bag was overweight and you were going to be charged, then naturally you want to get your bag back so you can unpack it, right? So I won't give you the real numbers, but what started off as being a saving of 100 people end up in a recruitment drive for an additional 120 people. So in the end, instead of having 100 people processing people in the way they used to do, they now have 220 people in an automated process. So a real good example of what not to do. Now, how could they have avoided that? Well, what is the successful outcome of the check-in process? So what we get checked in successfully, and you go, yeah, it's not some sort of infinitesimal, unimaginable thing. It's like the successful outcome of a check-in process is that we have checked in successfully. So what's the optimum way of doing that? Well, let's write down the current state moments of truth, and then let's see if we can eradicate them. You'll come up with a whole completely different solution than simply automating the mess that already existed. So thanks for sharing that, Victoria. You've got my sympathies. My sister-in-law, she runs, she's like the Uber help desk person for a company called British Petroleum. So not BP as we are, business performance, but British Petroleum. Okay. And she's got stories like that. Oh, where people were bringing consultants. Nothing wrong with consultants. I know some good consultants. I am one myself. But if consultants are used to selling snake oil, they'll find some susceptible executive who's got a budget and then tell you, look, we can implement this. And I've got a demo from somebody this afternoon who's demoing me. Why are they demoing it to me? They think I'm interested in the product. I'm not. What I'm trying to do is demonstrate that people shouldn't buy this particular product. And I have a client who's just about to buy it. So I want to be able to unpick it. And the only way of doing that is to actually see the product in a real live environment. So I do a little bit of mystery shopping like that occasionally. So yes, there's a lot of opportunity. There's lots of opportunity when we're doing this around experiences that have been automated. To just as Zappos did, is close down the call center facilities. Cabela's did something similar a few years ago where they said, yeah, we're not going to have call centers in the way that we've got them now. We're closing them down. And if the phone rings inside of the store and you're a staff member, pick up the phone because it's just as likely to be a customer. Stay on the line and help the customer achieve the outcome that they need. You might have to figure out what the need is and what the outcome is going to be, but stay on the line. And of course, the resistance comes from people who are not used to dealing with people. You know, say some of the technology folks, for instance, and say, I'm in technology. That's the reason I'm in technology. I don't like dealing with people. And they go, no, from here on in, we're all in this customer obsessed world. So you'll learn to deal with people. Well, I'm not sure I can do that. No, what you have to do is if you can't answer the query on the phone from the customer, is find who is the go-to person in the organization, stay on the line while the conversation happens. And by the time you get to the end of the conversation, your skill will improve. You'll know a little bit more than you did at the start of that. course, some people voted with their feet and decided to leave because they didn't want to be in that world. Other people who can now see this opportunity to get, you know, a multifaceted skill set, they really enjoyed that employee enablement, the action in the moment capability that came with that. So there's lots of interesting things to talk about there. But so that's an explanation of the customer experience life cycle. If we're thinking about that in the sort of context of the improvements, we can map it in the same, just in the same sort of way, the before and after moments of truth. But it's also a sanity check. It's allowing you to sort of say, is there a moment of truth in the buy-in stage in that future customer experience? Or is that encompassed in one of those other moments of truth, either number 1 or number 2? Right. As I said, number 2 and number 3 are now merging, and number 5 and number 6 have merged. So there's actually 4. So eventually imagine this utopian world, this nirvana of this system, where we have one moment of truth. How would that work? And we can envisage that now. We know what it looks like. The technology doesn't sufficiently exist in a robust enough form to implement that yet. Also, we have to educate in this context, this organization. This is relevant to 80% of our partners, right? To 80% of our customers. The other 20% are still stuck back in Victorian times with quill pens and parchment paper. And so we ask ourselves the question, just as we would on customer categorization, do we want to still be doing business with those folks? Can we offload them to a competitor? Because they're obviously a big on cost for us. And yes, we might have had very strong relationships in the past, but we've moved with customer needs. Their needs really haven't changed, and 80% of what we do doesn't meet what they need to happen. So you can get into those discussions as well, which is that this is a group of customers that we don't necessarily want to carry anymore. So how can we, in an ethical way, move them to somebody who will look after them? So a whole bunch of strategic questions emerge when you're doing this. So disruption factor is an important sort of calibration. So your exercise from what we've been doing today, and I'm going to try and give you more time for the exercises rather than sort of keep talking, is so idea a process, probably the one that you're going to put in your outside in strategic matrix. Abacus, the current state of that. So you'd look on the process perspective of the OISM. Use the 6-step innovation approach. Abacus future state. So take that template, and these templates and exercises are in the directory, and then calculate the disruption factor using the formula. For the HO part of the disruption factor formula, assume it's 4 times moment of truth. So let me scan back up to there. So this part of it, right, we'll say plus 4 times moments of truth. Okay, so that's what, because we don't have the handovers when we're doing innovation. When we're doing other approaches like process alignment and optimization, we might have the handovers, but we don't have that perspective on it at the moment. So the formula works in the same way, because as we know, the ratio of handovers to moments of truth above a certain number of moments of truth, and I usually say around about 10, is going to be 3 or 4 handovers to every moment of truth. We will get into that tomorrow. So does that make sense, guys? I'm aware I'm hitting you with a lot, but I get so excited by innovation, and you end up, it's both a blessing and a curse, because what you'll begin to do is you'll begin to see it everywhere you go. You'll see the opportunity to actually eradicate moments of truth. And that's the curse, is you have to switch your brain off sometimes and just accept, you know, things are suboptimal. If you're in charge of this, then yes, you would do it in a different way. But imagine all the product design changes you could do, the service improvements, the actual internal experiences and the external experiences. How you could fix a problem very quickly by identifying what the current state is. And then we don't have to do some sort of Zen meditation to actually figure out what is it we're going to do in the future state. We can let it emerge. We can let those options emerge. And we could talk to the people around us and sort of say, okay, well, these 2 ideas don't fit together. Well, that's 2 separate experiences. What does that look like? Let's draw those up. Let's map those out. Good. I can see there's no question. So I've managed to get to the end of day 2, double quick time, to leave you with at least an hour, right? To be able to have a go at doing some of those exercises. Either if you haven't started them from yesterday, go and have a look at them. But thinking in the context of this, there's a previous deck already up there, but I've changed this one slightly. So what I'll do, within the next hour or two, is get this sort of deck in place so you can begin to play with this. Also, as we saw yesterday, it's taking Zoom. The world and his brother are using Zoom these days, aren't they? It takes it about 2.5 hours to compile, the 4 hours or so that we spent together. All right. Let's just see if there's anything extra in here. Oh yeah, let's do. I'll introduce this because it was in yesterday's deck. And the reason it's in both places, yesterday's deck and today's deck, is some people ask questions. Steve, you seem to be jaundiced against Net Promoter Score and customer satisfaction index. We'll get into that more tomorrow. But some people sort of say, well, what is there an alternative? And of course, I wouldn't be saying in the way I am being disparaging about Net Promoter Score if there wasn't a really viable alternative. So this grew up. What I'm going to show you now is one of the ways that people are beginning to explore this territory of being able to measure 100% of interactions 100% of the time. So before we, yes, Selden, we'll do that. But you want to do that today, or do you want to do that tomorrow? And I'll show you an example of the failure of NPS, and you'll quite like it because it's a company that's supposed to be hugely successful. And they really, really did fail with NPS. Oh no, it's tiresome. Yeah. Now I want to give you the argument. As I said, James Dawkins does a really good keynote speech in and around the failures of NPS, and we don't want to go. We would not be disparaging of it if there wasn't an alternative. This is the alternative, and let me first of all, by segue, show you a little bit of a story. When you go to Disney now, to a Disney theme park, when they reopen and we all get out of lockdown, when you go to a Disney theme park, you'll notice as you go into the park, by the ticketing and by the main concourse, and actually at the washroom and bathroom facilities as you go in, there's notices which say things to the effect of, we record all our conversation for training purposes, right? And you think, oh yeah, that's just like you're calling into a call center and all our calls are recorded for training purposes. No, there's a little bit more to it than that. Every single thing, every single conversation that happens in the theme park is recorded, right? And acted upon. You go, oh my goodness me. They're listening to me and my family chatting away about the experience that we're having. That's true. And of course, that all gets fed into, an AI in this instance, engine, which strips out all the meaningless sort of filler words, looks at keywords, and then discerns patterns. And from those patterns, you can discern whether things are running right and well or not. Right. Also gives you lots of information, and what you'll be able to calibrate. How are we performing in the park? Are there issues developing? And Disney have developed this thing called action in the moment capability, where every cast member, so if you're an employee with Disney, you're a cast member, is enabled above and beyond to fix any problem that the customer might experience, right? So what's this 100% of interactions 100% of the time? So imagine, for the sake of argument, and this is one of the stories they were telling us a few months ago, is you're say you're the Johnson family from New York City, right? And you're having a fantastic time, and you're staying at one of the Disney themed hotels, and you're wandering around the park, and you're spotted by Cinderella. And the message comes over Cinderella's intercom system. Cinders, you see the family over there? That's the Johnsons from New York, okay? By the way, it's raining in New York this morning. And as we know, it's beautiful and sunny here in Orlando, right? So you might want to say something about that. But you see the little girl with them, that's Julie. She's 7 years old today. Could you go over and weave your magic? And Disney say they're in the business of magic, so that's appropriate. So Cinders walks over to them and says, Johnson family, what a beautiful day. I hear say it's raining in New York this morning, so you're so lucky to be here. Oh, and Julie, it's wonderful that you're in the park on your birthday. Happy 7th birthday. And by the way, Johnsons, here's some tickets to the restaurants, on the complimentary tickets. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Now, is that magic? Wow, yeah, of course it is. Well, how did they know that? Well, it's because they're listening. They're listening in the park, and they're acting upon that listening. Do they need to run customer service about what was the experience like 2 weeks ago when you were in a theme park with us? No, because they know in the moment. I'll tell you one of the most galling thing, I'm sure the rest of you guys get this as well, is you'll go and stay at a hotel and about a week later you get a survey. What was your experience like? And you think, did you not know? Because I was there. And clearly, obviously not. You know, they're not capturing that information at those moments of truth. Well, why not? But imagine you could. How would you do that? Any suggestions and ideas? Right on the back of a cigarette packet, and let's see what the answers are. So how could you collect 100% of interactions information 100% of the time? So let's have a see. Anybody put anything in the chat room then? No, you're all being shy. So, oh yeah, something in the chat room. Yes, it can be difficult sometimes. So to an observation, it's difficult. It's also relatively easy to do with the level of technology that we've got now. So I'm going to introduce this idea to you. You don't have to necessarily adopt it. Some of the early adoptees with this, yes, somebody saying there about the China did bug the entire UN building in Addis Ababa. Yeah, listening to all the interactions all the time. Could they act upon that? And they probably did. The people who were the early adopters of this a few years ago were actually interested and held up as case studies for Net Promoter Score, right? Because they were looking for more scientific ways. So instead of having lots and lots of customer surveys and customer satisfaction indices and all that sort of stuff, is perhaps one question on a scale of 1 to 10. How subjective and irrational is that? I sort of lose the will to live when people start sort of telling me about they've adopted NPS and linked it to their bonus scheme. I go, okay, so you're going the way of Nokia then. Good for you, right? So with CX rating, as it was initially called, and we shorthand it to the 4 E's, you'll see why it's called the 4 E's. And there's experiments with this taking place, but the organizations like Disney are way ahead of everybody else with doing this. There's other retailers in the, I don't know if I should say this, Victoria, but Nordstrom, they're advocates of the 4E approach as well. Now, it's not so much that it's difficult to do. It's just that there's a degree of upskilling that you've got to do with people who are involved in the moments of truth. So let's examine that for what it is. I'll say it's not in the main material, but I included it yesterday because sometimes people ask the question and we didn't get to it. So what's the 4E's all about? Well, the whole idea is that it should be every experience should be connected with everybody in the organization. And you shouldn't be doing anything, any task or activity, or if you're an IT system, you shouldn't be running any program which isn't in some way contributing to the successful customer outcome. So we have to have a way of connecting the dots to do that. And I'm going to show you that way over the next couple of days. But safe to say that we need to be able to demonstrate that everything we're doing as an organization contributes to the delivery of a successful customer outcome. So the 4E's idea is naturally going to be integrated with the work that everyone sort of does. It's also, in the terms of thinking about it, covers off certain parts of experiences that we have as customers. But if they're embodied within a moment of truth, we can then disassemble them and understand them better. And the 4 E's, as it says there, stand for expectation, encounter, emotion, and experience. So imagine we had a score for expectation, encounter, emotion, and experience, which told us how this interaction was performing now, at this moment, right? And perhaps if also down the road, we could automate that understanding, not automate the interaction, but actually automate the collection of data around the interaction, and to begin to automatically populate dashboards to show how we're performing at any one time. So that's the nirvana place to get to. It means you can turn off customer surveys. It means you don't need to do any of that subjective perceptual stuff anymore. You're going to have measures for 100% of your interactions 100% of the time. I'm scaring you now, right? So when the theory of this was arising a few years ago, and we started to work with a large motor company in the US, who have been quite successful in deploying this and getting rid of the Net Promoter Score system. And they're saying how much better it is in terms of informing their product design, informing the service processes. Now, they haven't deployed it across all of the moments of truth, but to subsets of the moments of truth. And that's how you start. So fairly typically, people might start in the call center, as some people call it. Well, I like to think of those as customer experience centers, because that's where we're having these experiences. Begin to deploy as a mechanism in there. So if we start to think about that, connecting to the successful customer outcomes, so how do we do it? So let's get past a few of these slides you can sort of read offline, but here's the model I can talk to most easily. As I said, there's 4 E's: expectation, emotion, experience, and encounter. So an expectation, as it says there, in terms of this moment of truth that the customer is experiencing at the moment, does the customer understand this? Do they understand, what the requirements are within this moment of truth? And is this moment of truth experience aligned with helping the customer get to success? Right. So if you're in a call center and failure demand is happening, then clearly the moment of truth isn't aligned to success. We want to eradicate those, and in lean we will get rid of them. But what we want to do here is we want to re-engineer them so that they can become outside in. So the elements of expectation, for instance, is it timely, efficient, effective, and aligned? So what we say to people, for instance, is we're going to teach you the 4 E's. And in this first week, what you're going to find is in that every call you have with the customer, a little box is going to pop up on the screen. And on a scale of 1 to 10, we want to give you a score. So if you think customer expectations are being met, this is the first one we do, is score it a 9 or a 10. And if you think they're not, score it a 1 or a 2. So that's the first day. So imagine we've got a call center with 100 people, and these boxes are popping up in every conversation that they're having with customers, and they're scoring them. So we can begin to collect the data. Now, initially you're collecting the data, there's some upskilling required in terms of helping people understand. When we say expectation, what we mean is, did the customer arrive into this conversation with an understanding of where the conversation was going to end, what the goal of the conversation was, or not? So that might be to do with alignment. Had they been aligned beforehand? So some of the examples we get, for instance, customers just bought a product and the salespeople have oversold the expectation. So the customer comes in on a call and they're struggling with trying to get the system up and running and stuff, and then you have to explain it to them. The customer's expectation isn't aligned with successful outcome. So you need to go upstream and fix the sales narratives there to stop giving customers false expectations, if that makes sense. Is it effective? Is it efficient and timely? So we introduce expectation. On day 2, we might sort of delve deep down. Elements of expectation include is in this interaction that we're having with the customer, right? Is this being done in a timely way? Now, I don't mean timely in terms of how long it takes us on the call, but is this at the right part of the life cycle for the customer? Is this conversation one that we can have with the customer in terms of helping them solve whatever issue, problem, challenge, opportunity that they're addressing? Is the way we've arranged for the customer to be in this moment of truth efficient and effective? Have we thought about it? Have we aligned the micro moments of truth in this conversation in such a way that we've engineered and crafted the conversation? But part of the genius of this is that you're not grading the customer, right? And you're not grading the employee. So this isn't about employee satisfaction or customer satisfaction. This is about the interaction itself. That's what we're scoring. So I'll give you some examples of what's occurred in case study, and we're including this in the new book I'm writing, which is I have to remember the name of it now. Customer experience. What's I called the damn? Oh, secret customer experience secrets. So it's one of the sort of secret things in those in terms of how organizations do it. And there was one situation where we were in calls and people were scoring it. And when you start getting scores in, if you do a bell curve for the distribution of the scores, so say we have 100 people and there's 100 calls, that gives us a lot of data. And say the mean value, the mean average was coming out at 6.5 out of 10. So we get the teams together and we say, guys, the mean is 6.5 here. We'll talk to you outliers in a few minutes, but the mean is 6.5. So we're mostly scoring between 5 and 7.5 and that sort of thing. Why are we scoring so low? And again, going back to the sort of the facts of this, was one conversation they're having was, well, when the customer calls in, they've just installed the product's up and running, right? And it's asked them for a passcode and they have to set the passcode. Well, the passcode is usually underneath the router or something like that. And so we have to give them the instructions. But they were told it had already been preset for them. Now, if they knew they were going to have to do this and we could give them instructions for it, instead of scoring at 6.5, I'd probably score the interaction at a 7.5. Well, why only 7.5? Why not 9 or a 10? Well, the other thing that happens is when the customer calls in, because they're a new customer, they're in the new customer database. They're not in the existing customer database. So I have to navigate across those two screens to see where they are. And then there's a third screen, which is the help desk system. So the instructions we're going to send to the customer for actually doing this are in the help desk system. So I have to navigate to another screen. So you have to navigate 3 screens then? Yeah, that's right. Are you saying that if we had one screen and the data was presented on one screen, that would be better? Oh yeah, of course it would. I'd probably score it 8.5 then. Is there anything else that we could be doing which would cause you to score the interaction higher? So all these things become what we refer to as action in the moment. You can go away and you can implement change based on that feedback. Now, just in the same way you might have a mean average and a mode average in the, underneath a bell curve. If you're looking outside, it says 2 standard deviations outside of the bell curve, you may have some people who are scoring significantly lower than everybody else. And 1 or 2 things are going on there. Either they are unduly pessimistic, right, and the whole world's a depressing grey place and we're not getting anything. Or they may have insights that none of the rest of us have got. So either way, it's an opportunity there to have those discussions. Likewise, at the other end of the bell curve, you'll have the people in marketing who are unduly scoring high. No, that would be derogatory to marketing. I don't want to do that. But they'll be unduly optimistic. So everybody else is scoring 6.5, 7, right? But they're scoring 8.5, 9 already. Oh. Well, it might not be that they're just optimistic. They may also have insights that none of the rest of us have got. And they may have figured a way of navigating these moments of truth in a way that others would benefit from knowing as well. So introduce expectation. Usually takes about a week to do that. And then we'll introduce, progressively over a month, the 4 E's. So after a month, every single interaction that you're having, in this context, the call center, is measured. We have a measurement associated with it, and we can act upon that measure. We don't need to now go to the customer and say, the interaction you had with us like 2 weeks ago when you phoned us, and we want to ask you either 30 questions or 1 question. No, we don't need to do that. We already know how we're performing. We know how to improve performance. We can calibrate that improvement. We can get on with it straight away. Now, it doesn't have to be automated. It doesn't have to be a little box that pops up. When we've been deploying this, you do it through notepads and note sheets, and then team leaders go and collect them. Of course, it's not just applicable to call centers, but that's where we usually start, because that's the area where people are most familiar with measurement systems. But measurement systems like average handle time, abandon rate, failure demand, all that other sort of stuff. So this is just another way of actually being able to measure more effectively things that are happening now. So that's the 4 E's. When we organizations who actually put this in, go ahead and deploy it. Usually the runtime to actually make it effective is usually around about 6 months. So upskilling, if you had a sort of a body of a couple of 100 people you were bringing this into, is not to rush at it necessarily. It's to make sure that we're getting a degree of consistency. Now, it's not about getting everybody to score the same, because the scoring the difference is where you get some of the observations. But what we want to understand is, in terms of all the things that we're doing, all the experiences that we're managing within this environment at the moment, which are the ones that are least effective? Which are the ones where we want to focus our improvement efforts to get them to a new place, and then use 6SI and things like that to completely re-engineer them? So that's something that's out there. And of course, we work with certain sort of software vendors who integrate these things into things like Salesforce, and the feedback organizations are getting interested in this as well now, because they can see the writings on the wall. If a lot of people were adopting this, then why would we need a lot of that sort of those feedback routines when we've got this feed forward mechanism? The ability to actually not be looking in the rearview mirror and driving the car, but actually look down the road, but also create the ability, because we've got a drone ahead of us, to actually see around the next corner. So that's the purpose of it. So I just wanted to throw that one in there, just to whet your appetites, to show that we can get as scientific as we need to be without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's a case of, yeah, that would work. So let me cycle back, having introduced that as an idea. So we've covered off the the content of day 2. I don't want to introduce anything else to you at this stage, but the exercise would be around go and identify a process, probably the one that you've put in your outside in strategic matrix. Look at the beginning and end. Look at that box which talked in the bottom left of the OISM, which talked about the process, touch points, and the moments of truth. That's where your moments of truth are. String out your moments of truth on your POF doc, so top to bottom. Then go through the innovation process, identify things that would eradicate those moments of truth forever. Then from that, identify the ones which give you the biggest bang for the buck. Talk about the future state, what that would look like on Abacus, and then calculate your disruption factor. Good. Are we okay with that? Any sort of questions, thoughts, comments? Have I blown your brains?
Steve, just the best place to be able to go back and see these frameworks and so on, is that today's download?
Yes, it will be. I think, let me just go and check. Let me segue off into my directories at the moment, because I was doing some work on this morning, as I said, for the Australian side of things. Let me have a look into day 2, because I can probably give you access to the chat room straight away. The day 2 sessions, I'm showing the right screen here. I can never tell when I'm doing the screen share, whether everybody can see it. And what I normally have as well, I don't know if you guys do this, but I've got a phone running in the background as well, which has what you could see, right? So I can see where we are on the screen and things. So you should be looking at the directory under day 2 now. And day 2 sessions, for instance, these are the sessions we've just gone through. So I've already put the PDFs up there. And that's the PowerPoint version of this. I've just changed a couple of slides on the fly, but to all intents and purposes, that's 99% there already. So you'll be able to, and I'll give you this link in there. The class videos, obviously this video isn't in there yet, and it won't be there until Zoom's compiled it. If you have a look in there at the moment, you'll see there was a July day 2, an August day 2, and then we've got some exemplar innovation videos. So if we go into this one, for instance, trying to open the PowerPoint. If we go into this one, what we did was, instead of having the videos in there as MP4 files, and then it's really down to, you know, what players have you got, what we've done is we've embedded the videos, check I'm sharing the same screen again, embedded the videos inside of a PowerPoint deck, so that you can see these things. You are screen sharing, stop share, screen share. So these innovation videos here, which are related to day 2, are all about what we've just talked about. And there's examples in there from Amazon, Apple, KLM, Westpac, Virgin Hotels, and they're all there. So there's 17 discrete videos that are embedded in PowerPoint. So all you need to do is run PowerPoint, you know, after you've downloaded it, and the videos will play when you get onto that screen. So that's in there as well. Let's come back to this. I think I'm overloading the system now. Screen. Stop that doing that. So I will give you access to day 2 now. Let me just go and get the Dropbox link for that, and I'm going to put it in the chat room so you can actually cut and paste it straight away. So chat. Save you waiting to get the email in about an hour's time. So there should be a link there. Oh, they'll send that. Let me send that to everybody. Everyone in the meeting. Right. So that's the Dropbox link to day 2. Right. The reason I do this, day 1, day 2, day 3, it's not that day 4 isn't already there. It's based on the questions that you're asking me on each day, I change the deck the following day. So that's why you can get access to the old material that was in the previous sessions, if you want to sort of validate that, and also some of the videos. Sometimes people will ask about, do we have a video on this subject matter? And what I will do is I'll scour our libraries, and we've got permission to use all these videos. So you're not infringing copyright or IP or anything like that. So can everybody see the link to the Dropbox? So all I would suggest you do though is you can wait for me to send you the email in the next hour or so. But if you cut and paste that and do that, you should be able to get access into day 2. What else is in day 2? So we've got the exercises and the templates. So there's the abacus template, and then the day 2 exercises, the ones we've just talked about. There's the class video will go in there, but at the moment there's the July day 2 class and the August day 2 session recordings, if you wish to do that. As I said, the example innovation videos, and there's a few of those. Yeah, so that's basically it. Are we good with that? Good. So we've still got 35 minutes. So even with doing the CX rating and the 4Es, give yourself some time to think about that. Is it applicable everywhere? No, it's not. Organizations already need to get customer experience. They need to understand it's important. So exactly to the point we were talking about earlier on, just changing the name of a customer contact center to a customer experience center might be precisely the wrong thing to do if management perceive that, you know, you are just putting lipstick on the pig. Is we have to think about crafting the experiences and why every experience should be connected to the moments of truth and everything everybody else is doing in the organization, every system, every person. And that's something we'll get into tomorrow. So any questions on what we've covered, guys? So yeah, day 3 is already in there as well. So I'll give you that link tomorrow. Good. Well, 1 or 2 people have asked to sort of talk offline. So what I'm going to suggest we do for those conversations is give it about 10 minutes and then let's get on WhatsApp together, because that's going to be easier than sort of keeping the Zoom room open and all that sort of stuff, if that makes sense. Good. So 35 minutes left. If there are no questions, you're letting me off lightly now. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Get into the material. If anything springs to mind, you want to ask any questions between now and getting together again, is WhatsApp me, ping me, phone me, direct message me on LinkedIn, all those different ways we've got to get in touch with each other now. It's just sort of make sure you're known. Go and have a look at that thing that James has posted if you get a chance. Did I copy that? I don't think I've copied that to everybody, certainly for the folks in South Africa. And I'll send a link to you, Victoria, and the folks on the recording. It'll be embedded in this directory by the time you guys get to it in Australia, New Zealand, and South America. Okay, good.
Magic. Thank you, Steve. We'll see you tomorrow. This is very cool stuff. Thank you.
Good. Let's see if you're still saying that after day 4. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you again tomorrow.
All right.
you.
Cheers,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Yeah, cheers.